Good evening. The time is 5:32 p.m. on February 15, 2017, and this public meeting of the District of Columbia State Board of Education is now called to order. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Haywood?
Ms. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
Ms. Carter.
Present.
Ms. Wilson-Phelan.
Present.
Ms. Wattenberg. Ms. Wattenberg. Dr. Woodruff.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Present.
Mr. Whedon.
Present.
Mr. Batchelor. Ms. Hall. Ms. Hall. Mr. DeRosen. Mr. DeRosen. Madam President, you have a quorum.
A quorum has been determined, and the State Board will proceed now with the business portion of the meeting. Members, we have a draft agenda before us. Are there any corrections or additions to the agenda?
Madam President, in item 9, physical education standards, I inadvertently put a witness on the wrong panel. Dr. Klein should be on the panel for ESSA, and so she will be added to panel 1 under agenda item 10.
Got that motion for that? Thank you. Seeing no changes, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
The motion being properly moved and second, I will ask for yeas and nays. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is approved. Next on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 13th, January 24th, and February 1st working sessions. Are there corrections or additions to the minutes? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes in a block. Is there a proposed, may I have a
So moved.
second?
Second.
The motion being properly moved in second, I will ask for approval. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nay. The motion is approved. Good evening. My name is Karen Williams, Ward 7 Representative and President of the State Board of Education. On behalf of the members of the District of Columbia State Board of Education, I want to welcome our guests and our viewing public to our Wednesday, February 15th public meeting. The State Board typically holds its regularly scheduled meetings on the third Wednesday of every month in the Old Council Chambers at 441 4th Street Northwest. Tonight, the State Board will consider two important items: new physical education standards and a draft accountability plan for public schools in the District of Columbia. We will also recognize one of our outstanding teachers, Elizabeth Dewhurst. As the Washington Post reported in a series of articles last year, the Council enacted the Healthy Schools Act, in part to ensure that our schools provided appropriate levels of physical activity. Not all of our schools are meeting the goals of the Healthy Schools Act yet. The Office of the State Superintendent of Education is here tonight with an excellent panel of witnesses to discuss how the proposed changes to our physical education standards will help students develop motor skills, knowledge, and behaviors for a lifetime of healthy living. The State Board will also continue its work tonight related to ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. We will be hearing from 3 panels of witnesses who will be providing their input on the draft accountability plan that OSSE put out for public comment on January 30th. If you have not had time to review the plan, I urge you to go do so by visiting OSSE's website at osse.dc.gov/ESSA. OSSE is collecting public input on the plan through March the 3rd and will present a final draft of the plan for State Board to approve later in March. In partnership with OSSE, the State Board is now holding meetings across the district to discuss the draft plan. We have already visited wards 1, 2, and 3. Information about the remaining meetings can be found on our website at sboe.dc.gov/ESSA. Before we move to our recognition of Ms. Dewhurst and public comment, I would like to invite our State Superintendent of Education, Hansel Kane, to provide opening remarks.
Thank you very much, President Williams, and good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Hansel Kang, and I'm the State Superintendent of Education. As the President said, tonight we will hear from a panel about the updated physical education standards that OSSE is proposing based on national standards updated to meet the DC context that would also better align with the day-to-day needs of physical education teachers in DC. We're looking forward to the panel and the discussion. And then on the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, we have held community meetings for Wards 1 and 2 and Ward 3 to date. Ward 4 will take place tomorrow evening, and we're looking forward to that discussion. And the remaining meetings will take place over the next 2 weeks. So again, please check out our website, osse.dc.gov/ESSA. We appreciate all the feedback we are getting and look forward to continuing to receive feedback in person or online through March 3rd. We will fully consider all of the feedback we have received before finalizing our plan to share with the board and for submission to the U.S. Department of Education in April. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kang. The State Board welcomes public participation in activities under our authority. At every public meeting, we begin with testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak at a future public meeting, please contact our staff at SBOE at dc.gov or by calling 202-741-0888. Tonight, our first panel will be Marilee Holmes, Ashley Taylor, Maya Martin, Dana Richard, and Mazaria Stevenson. Come up front, please. What's her name? They're not here. All right. So we'll go to our second panel. Antoinette Poindexter, Tyree Wilkinson, Jaden Abney, Sammy Graves, Mary McDuffie, okay, you're not here? All right, so we go to physical education standards.
No, you have to go to
The All right, while we're waiting for our panelists to come, is Ms. Dewhurst here? Yes, thank you. Tonight, we are joined by one of the district's true heroines, Ms. Elizabeth Dewhurst. Ms. Dewhurst, please come down to the table. Ms. Dewhurst is the District Teacher of the Year, a reading intervention teacher at Stewart Hobson Middle School. She has been inspiring students every day for over 10 years. Ms. Dewhurst, would you like to make a few remarks before we consider a resolution honoring you and your achievements in the classroom?
Good evening. It's nice to be here. Oh, push.
You're good.
Am I on? Yes. I like the mic. I might get used to that. It's great to be here. Thank you so much, and thank you, State Superintendent Kang. It's nice to see you again under different circumstances than the surprise in my classroom about a month ago with 3 news crews. I view my role as the State Teacher of the Year as someone who garners the voice of especially students from across the city, and I'll be spending my time while still working full-time to do just that. And then I'm already paying attention to legislation coming through this body and others to share that voice in those gatherings, and as well as educators, but primarily students. So thank you for that opportunity to share that voice.
Thank you. I'm having problems with the mic today, too. Thank you for Mrs. Dewhurst. It is our honor to have you here. Members, we have a ceremonial resolution honoring Ms. Dewhurst before us. After a motion to consider the resolution, I will ask Mr. Hayworth to read it into the record before opening the floors for comment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
The motion being properly moved and seconded, Mr. Haywood, would you now read the resolution into the record?
District of Columbia State Board of Education, CR 1701, ceremonial resolution honoring Elizabeth Dewhurst, 2017 District of Columbia Teacher of the Year. Whereas every year, a teacher who is an exemplary educator is named the District of Columbia Teacher of the Year and receives public recognition and an unrestricted financial award of $7,500. Whereas the State Board of Education is proud to recognize a District of Columbia school teacher, Elizabeth Dewhurst, as the 2017 recipient of this prestigious award. Whereas Ms. Dewhurst, a 10-year educator, has been at Stuart Hobson Middle School since 2013, where she teaches 8th grade reading intervention courses while serving as the reading intervention team lead. Whereas Ms. Dewhurst's approach to teaching includes contributing to school-wide literacy efforts as a member of Stuart Hobson's Middle School's academic leadership team and implementation of the school's first summer reading camp 2 years ago. Whereas Ms. Dewhurst has received praise from both parents and colleagues for her shining example and ability to instill a desire for academic achievement and character development for her students. And whereas the State Board of Education recognizes the extraordinary example set by Ms. Dewhurst of setting high expectations for all of her students to multiply their potential, which in turn leads to every one of her students working exceptionally hard to succeed. Now therefore, be it resolved that on February 15th, 2017, the District of Columbia State Board of Education honors Elizabeth Dewhurst, 2017 Teacher of the Year recipient, and recognizes her commitment to providing an excellent education to students of the District of Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Hayworth. Is there any discussion on the resolution? Mr. Whedon?
It's great to see you again. I'd just like to say on behalf of the Ward 6, Stuart Hobson, Capitol Hill Cluster community, thank you for all you do. Inspiration to us all. As I've seen your classroom, I've met some of the students. Fabulous work. And we need to really capture and highlight what you and all the teachers across the city do. So thank you.
Any more?
Madam President, I'll just offer my congratulations to Ms. Dewhurst. Obviously, Joe can be very proud of your contributions to his students in Ward 6, but we're all very proud, and we know that there are teachers like you all over the city and that you're a shining example for teachers who want to be dedicated and serve our students and go above and beyond. So thank you so much, and you're definitely an inspiration to all of us on the board. Thank you.
As a former teacher myself, I'd like to thank you for the exemplary job you're doing with our students. We need more like you. Can you clone yourself?
No, but you're all welcome to come by anytime.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, I'd like to comment, Ms. Dewhurst. I'd like to thank you for implementing your summer program. I met you and was going to take part in it, and you actually explained it all to me, and at that point another job came along. But in between that, I do understand, and it seemed like it was going to be an awesome program. I'm glad to hear it was. Congratulations.
Any other comments? Seeing no further discussion, the question is approval of a ceremonial resolution honoring Elizabeth Dewhurst, DC's Teacher of the Year. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? The motion is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Dewhurst, I would like to call a 5-minute recess so the board can get a picture with. Recess.
picture. All right, wait, I'm not going to. Only for you, Mr. All right. Only for you. Technology issue. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Oh, it's Girl Scout cookies, isn't it? Yes. No, I got done long before that, and I just made a few poor decisions late in the afternoon about.
As I mentioned in the opening remarks, OSSI has proposed updates to our current physical education standards. The proposed changes have come to us after extensive input from experts and district teachers. Tonight, I am pleased to recognize Donna Anthony, Assistant Superintendent of Health and Wellness, who will provide her input on the proposed changes. Ms. Anthony, you will have 5 minutes to provide testimony, followed by 1 round of questions from board members. You can begin whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify this evening regarding the physical education standards for the District of Columbia. I'm Donna Anthony. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Health and Wellness at the Office of the State Superintendent for Education, which is the longest title, I think, in our agency. According to the Society of Health and Physical Educators, also known as SHAPE America, who we have here tonight, physical education is an academic subject that provides a planned, sequential K-12 standards-based program of curriculum and instruction designed to develop motor skills, knowledge and behaviors for a healthy, active living, physical fitness, sportsmanship, self-efficacy, and emotional intelligence. OSSI's strategy in supporting local educations around physical education is trifold. We want to ensure that all students have access to PE. We want to incentivize adequate quantity of PE, making sure that students get enough minutes in their day and their week. And lastly, we want to support high quality instruction. And the PE standards are really what we view as the foundation of that quality instruction across the district, no matter what school you go to. After the health standards were approved last spring, OSSI started the process to update the existing physical education standards, which were put in place in 2008. We worked with our physical activity subcommittee, which reports to the Healthy Youth in Schools Commission. We have someone here from that group tonight. And they started the process by developing a working group to focus exclusively on the standards. The working group was comprised of representatives from DCPS, the Public Charter School Board, community-based organizations that do a lot of physical activity and education work with our schools, as well as OSSI. The group is proposing the adoption of the National Physical Education Standards that were developed by SHAPE America. We have a few minor changes that we would like to propose to make sure that they're relevant in terms of 2017 and not recommending certain products or things that are no longer used by youth, as well as making sure that they're relevant to the district itself. An additional benefit to adopting the standards is that many teachers are trained on these standards in their training, as well as a lot of the PE curricula that you can purchase off the shelf are based off of these national standards. And so it's creating a lot of ease in implementation as well as alignment. The proposed physical education standards are also, we circulated them to teachers. We put them out through our weekly newsletter, and we've posted them on our website for feedback. We've sent them to all the physical educators who have been grantees and who have come to our trainings and asked for feedback as well. Once they're approved, our working group that we've been working on for these physical education standards will tackle the developing adapted physical education standards, and that'll help ensure that students with disabilities can also get access to high quality physical education. The national physical education standards that were developed by Shape America in 2013 received input from the Curriculum Framework Task Force, and they're being adopted by several states across the country. The proposed physical education standards are comprehensive, and they address the 3 domains of learning, which is cognitive, related to the knowledge of movement; affective, which address growth in feelings and attitudes; and psychomotor, which relate to movement literacy, which movement literacy was a new term for me. ASSE will support the implementation of the standards by developing and distributing resources, organizing continued professional development opportunities for teachers, and we will provide continued technical assistance to schools based on request or based on when we think that they need it, because they are flagging with certain concerns. Today, I think my testimony just kind of introduces this topic. I have a group of expert panelists here with me today, and their testimony, they specialize in this area, and so I want to make time for them. I'd like to thank them for joining me tonight, and I look forward to their testimony, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you for your insight. Members, to respect the time and energy of the many people who have joined us tonight to testify on the PE changes in ESSA, we will have a single round of questions, no more than 3 minutes from each board member, for Ms. Anthony and for our other panels tonight. Who would like to begin? Who has a question? No questions? Wow. Well,
It just might be worth stating for the record that Ms. Anthony has been very generous and spoken with us now 3 times. So many of us have had the opportunity to ask her questions in the past. It's not that we're uninterested in the topic. I just wanted to make sure the public understood that.
and I'd like to thank you for being here tonight and for all your work on behalf of these, putting together these standards and looking out for our students' health. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Our next panel will consist of Marion Keenan, Director of Health and Physical Education at DCPS, Bill Bias, Director of Sumner M. Redstone Global Center for Protection and Wellness and Professor at GWU, Greg Albright, Athletic Director, DC International, and Carly Wright, Senior Manager of Advocacy for SHAPE. You all please come forward. I'd like to thank you all for coming down tonight to testify. We will begin on my right, your left. Please know that you have 5 minutes each. So, and after you finish your testimony, each board members will have 1 round of questions, 3 minutes each. Thank you. If you have not already done so, please email your written version of your testimony to sboe.dc.gov so we may add it to our official record. Please begin when you're ready.
Great. Good evening, and thank you. My name is Miriam Kenyon. I am the Director of Health and Physical Education for DC Public Schools. And I did already email my testimony. And so I'm going to just read what I wrote, which is, this is not your physical education class, or in some cases, your parents' physical education class. 21st century physical education is likely vastly different from what most people's experience was growing up. When talking to adults about their experiences in PE, many fall into 2 categories, love or hate. Typically, so-called athletes were efficient movers, liked competition, enjoyed and won dodgeball and other elimination or human target games. The folks that hated PE were usually the ones who fell subject to domination of upper-skilled 3%. They prayed to be out and didn't care whether they got the ball. Instead, sheepishly tried to become invisible. Activities were designed to engage the students who were already highly skilled and not the other 80% of the population. Competitive sports and elimination games similar to organized play, like today we're going to play capture the flag, are not examples of objective-driven lessons for physical education class. The goals for physical education are to develop physically literate individuals who have the knowledge, skills, and confidence to enjoy a lifetime of healthful physical activity. Through quality physical education aligned to these new standards, we can meet this goal and change the health outcomes of our city's youth and adults. In addition to meeting these goals, adopting the proposed standards will provide a clear distinction of the academic content taught in physical education class that would not be met through participation on team sports or a club that includes physical activity. Merely participating regularly on a team does not meet the wide range of standards, including demonstrating proficiency in a variety of lifetime skills or the content knowledge required to assess, develop, apply, and reevaluate fitness goals. With a quality physical education experience, one would expect lifelong physical activity. The following highlights some of the significant changes from our previous DC standards to the new proposed standards. One, in high school standards focus on developing skills for lifetime physical activity to include dance, net and wall sports, outdoor pursuits, personal and group fitness. This is vastly different from the previous standards that focus on refining team sport skills. This makes sense because we need to prepare students for college and career readiness so that when they're on their own, they won't need to get 10 friends together to exercise. They have the skills to assess, develop goals, create a variety of plans, and ultimately reach their health and fitness goals. The lower grade band outline outcomes that a teacher should expect based on developmental appropriateness. This is extremely important when planning lessons, especially when PE teachers see grade levels ranging from pre-K through 8th grade. Teachers can use the grade level standards and outcomes to make appropriate adjustments between grades when designing lessons. For example, in kindergarten, when working on catching, it's appropriate to allow 2 bounces before catching a drop ball. By 1st grade, students should be able to catch a self-tossed ball before it bounces. In summary, these standards reflect the national vision for physical education to empower students with confidence to be lifelong movers and ultimately impact health outcomes for the District of Columbia. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm Bill Dietz, a pediatrician and chair of the Redstone Global Center for Prevention and Wellness at George Washington University. I also currently serve as chair of the Healthy Youth and Schools Commission Subcommittee on Physical Activity. Prior to coming to Washington, I was the director of the Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for nearly 17 years. The district's fortunate to have the Healthy Schools Act, which recognizes the crucial importance of students' health to their academic and lifelong success. An essential part of the law is mandated physical education throughout the school week. The CDC's comprehensive school physical activity program, designed to help students meet the recommended 60 minutes per day of physical activity and to develop, quote, the knowledge, skills, and confidence to be physically active for a lifetime, includes physical education as a pillar. The delivery of high-quality physical education is foundational to building a comprehensive school physical activity program. Therefore, I encourage the district's adoption of the physical education standards put forth tonight. These standards have a sound evidence base, insofar as they were adapted from the national PE standards developed by Shape America, the national authority in physical education. Through high-quality PE classes, students learn the confidence and skills necessary for a lifetime of fitness. PE classes also contribute to the 60 minutes per day of moderate to vigorous physical activity, which is the recommended level of physical activity recommended by the National Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans. The Healthy Schools Act and these proposed PE standards require that at least 50% of PE class be devoted to moderate to vigorous physical activity. In a broader context, a significant decrease in physical activity has played a major role in the obesity epidemic. Schools can and should promote physical activity to help prevent obesity, including through PE, recess, and classroom activity breaks. A recent study found that children gain weight over the summer when they're not in school, whereas they maintain their weight when they are in school. The lack of scheduled routine physical activity is a likely contributor to that summer weight gain. Quality physical education provides vital minutes of physical activity. Many people recognize the preventive health benefits of physical activity, including a reduced risk for obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. Less well recognized is the important impact of physical activity on improved cognitive development, learning, and self-control in children. A recent randomized controlled trial published in the journal Pediatrics showed that 7 to 9-year-olds who participated in an after-school program that met the daily physical activity requirements not only improved aerobic fitness, but also showed better brain function and cognitive performance, specifically executive brain function, compared to children who did not participate in the program. And this is a graphic that shows those differences. The activation of brains on your left and a non-active brain on your right. The development of healthy brain, executive brain function underpins academic skills and social emotional development. It also supports self-control that can reduce disruptive or aggressive behavior inside and outside the classroom. Such self-control not only benefits the individual student, it also improves the classroom environment and the uninterrupted learning of other students. The relationship between meeting national physical activity guidelines and academic success is illustrated by DC data from the 2015 Youth Risk Behavior Survey. 1/3 of high school students who reported getting mostly A's and B's got at least 60 minutes of physical activity a day on 5 or more days of the previous week. Only 22% of students who reported getting mostly D's and F's got that level of physical activity. Young children who experience adversity, including abuse, exposure to violence, or parental dysfunction, such as divorce or depression, may have diminished executive functioning, which will affect academic, health, and lifelong outcomes. Physical activity is closely associated with higher self-esteem and self-management, the executive functioning that also promotes learning. Physical activity may therefore act as a protective buffer that enables resilience among children exposed to adverse childhood experiences. To ensure that our students reap the cognitive, health, and academic benefits of becoming physically active for a lifetime, we need to teach them how to do so through quality physical education. Nonetheless, DC school-based data show that our schools are not meeting the physical education requirements set forth in the Healthy Schools Act, and many children fail to achieve the recommended physical activity requirements of 60 minutes per day. These negative outcomes likely contributed to increased rates of obesity, unrealized academic success, and diminished cognitive function for the district's youth, outcomes that follow them through their lives. I encourage the State Board of Education to adopt the physical education standards put forth tonight. I also encourage the board and all authorities and organizations in the district that impact students to collaborate to ensure full implementation of the levels of physical education required by the Healthy Schools Act and the recommended 60 minutes per day of physical activity. Thank you.
So I'm the one in the trenches. I'm going to start with, it's going to be a little different presentation. I don't want to be redundant. So I have a story. My vision of the ultimate culmination of physical education is reflected in a story and the actions that took place in a Division II college softball game. It was senior day, and stepping up to the plate was the most unlikely home run hitter in 5'2" Sarah Chokolsky. In fact, she had never hit a home run in her career. She was from Western Oregon University. But on the second pitch, she delivered a blast over the center field wall for a 3-run home run. When rounding first base, in her excitement, she missed the bag, and in returning to the base, she tore a ligament in her knee, crumpling to the ground, unable to move. To get credit for the home run, she has to tag all the bases without any help from teammates. Enter opposing superstar from Central Washington, Mallory Holtman, who politely says to the umpire, "Excuse me, would it be okay if we carried her around?" And she touched each bag. And so the story ends with Holtman and teammate Liz Wallace carrying her around the bases, gently lowering her to touch each base, to the background of a standing ovation. That is what I see in what can be and what we can do using these this curriculum. My name is Greg Albright. I'm the Athletic Director, Head of Physical Education and Wellness Director at DC International School, a fully accredited IB and Tier 1 charter school currently located in Columbia Heights. In my life, I've been fortunate to be part of many different experiences relating to physical activity as a participant, teacher, research faculty, coach, and administrator. I was an enthusiastic athlete in elementary, middle, high school, and college, culminating as a professional doubles volleyball player in California. Activity was an important outlet for my life, so I relate to the plethora of student athletes in DC just looking for a place to play. As a PE teacher for 28 years, 10 years in the IB, and a volleyball coach for middle and high school, club, the University of Mary Washington, and Olympic scout in London for the USA men's team, this journey has taken me from Southern California to Virginia, Atlanta, London, Lima, Peru, and now in Washington, DC. Thank you for this opportunity to testify this evening regarding the adoption of the Shape America physical education standards for the District of Columbia. I've been a longtime member of the previously named AFERD organization and have attended many conferences and utilized their many resources and networks. First, I would like to applaud and thank the efforts and hard work by the Aussie Health and Wellness team. I believe they are making a difference in the district with so many challenges, and they have been accessible and supportive. The other testimonies from my esteemed panel mates address the importance and logic of adopting the national PE standards by Shape America. I concur wholeheartedly. So as not to be redundant, I would like to address the third point of Ms. Anthony's testimony regarding the Aussie's three-pronged approach to support schools in their LEAs through student access to high-quality PE classes. So Shape America offers that, and it offers resources, it offers certifications, it offers what we need in the trenches. I have traveled to many of the schools as a varsity coach in the Southeast District, in the Northwest, all over, and the kids are being underserved in so many ways, and I'm so frustrated as coming from areas where they at least have proper facilities and curriculum and proper PE teachers. And this is a long time in coming. And I know it seems like a slam dunk. We're in the last phase of this, but it's not a fight that's over. And I really want to explore what happens after we pass this. Yeah, we can pass this, it'll look great on the shelf, but what are we doing next? And I volunteered with Aussie to go out and train other PE teachers. The charter schools especially are struggling with facilities and equipment, but these kids need more. And so adopting the Shape America is step one, but I want to continue this and make it work, because just doing that, it looks great, but we need to implement it, and we need to train those teachers. How do they do it? How do they get these facilities that seem non-existent, but I've been able to find a few and working with the Department of Rec. So in the trenches, this is an awesome thing, and let's continue with this, but I really want to implore the board, let's keep this going, because otherwise it will be lost, and I see it every day. I see a lack of opportunity for many of the girls in the district. I'm a firm believer in Title IX, meeting Billie Jean King and others, so I really want to see this move forward after this, and I really applaud that DC is doing this, and actually one of the best states I've been in terms of saying, hey, we have an issue, let's deal with it. Thank you for your time.
President Williams, Vice President Jacobson, and members of the board, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the adoption of updated DC physical education standards. My name is Carly Wright, and I'm the Senior Manager of Advocacy for Shape America, Society of Health and Physical Educators. As an organization, we are committed to empowering all children to lead healthy, active lifestyles through effective health and physical education programs. As the nation's largest organization of health and physical education professionals, we work with states and school districts across the country to provide guidance, professional development, resources, and best practices to educators and school leaders. We also have a strong commitment to advocacy and have led the charge at the national level to have physical education included in the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Every Student Succeeds Act. In ESSA, physical education has been included as part of a student's well-rounded education and now acknowledged as a critical component in educating the whole child. At Shape America, we set the national standards for physical education, which have been published and updated since 1995. 49 states and the District of Columbia have all adopted state physical education standards over the years that have aligned with our national standards. We commend DC for taking the opportunity to update your standards to now align with the newest version of the national standards. Over the past 2 decades, physical education has undergone a transformation in rigor and focus and is now recognized as essential to a young person's overall education experience and a foundation for lifelong healthy living. Shape America has helped to spearhead that transformation and redefine physical education in the new national standards and grade level outcomes for K-12 physical education as the pursuit of physical literacy, which parallels the terminology used in other academic subject areas. The new national standards adopted in 2014 and their accompanying grade level outcomes identify the skills and knowledge necessary to support the development of physically literate individuals, those who have the knowledge, skills, and confidence to enjoy a lifetime of physical activity. Shape America's national standards and grade level outcomes for K-12 physical education define what a student should know and be able to do as a result of a highly effective physical education program. The development of the national standards was based in evidence, research, and best practices. The updated standards were developed by a team of experts in the fields of physical education, pedagogy, curriculum, assessment, motor development, skill development, and biomechanics, with rigorous review and feedback from the field. The focus of the standards is on student learning, and they address not only physical competence and knowledge, but also the attitudes, motivation, social, and psychological skills needed for participation. In addition to the national standards for physical education, Shape America has developed grade level outcomes, accompanying lesson plans, appropriate instruction guidance, and student assessment tools to help states and school districts effectively implement the new standards and support high-quality physical education programs in schools. Shape America also provides states and school districts with expert technical assistance to support implementation of these standards. The ultimate focus of all of this work is to support amazing teachers, like the physical educators here in Washington, D.C., as they develop physically literate students that have a passion for physical activity. We wholeheartedly support the great work that OSSI has done over the past year to update their standards and to ensure that they will serve the needs of DC students and teachers. We urge you to support the implementation of these updated standards as well. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
I'd like to thank all of you for taking your time to come down and testify on this very important issue. Now, board members, are there any questions you'd like to ask the panel? Mr. Whedon?
Thank you all. I want to touch on something that Mr. Albright, you brought up. The barriers to implementation of the health standards. We know that many of the schools in the district are failing to meet the requirements under the law. What are some of the barriers that you see at the school level? Could you expand on that a little bit? And then what are some of the resources that we as a city need to ensure get put in place?
Absolutely. Great question. What I have observed comes down to a couple things. I think that in some of the areas, the teacher training and the teachers that are experienced know what they're doing, and in some areas that's lacking. So I think teacher training and supplementing that and making sure they're up to speed and observing and mentoring on that is one issue. The other issue comes down to sometimes it's facilities or equipment or safety. I think that if you ask some of the teachers would be an issue. I can even talk to our school. We're so fortunate to move to Walter Reed with a new gym next year, but we still don't have a full field. We have to still use a field. So I think the usage of and the opportunity to have fields in some leagues, games are canceled because there's not a gym, not a field available, or you're rearranging. So I know DC is a tough area because of the expense of everything and the lack of land, but I think it could be better organized where if we had an agency that saw everything that's available, because I know the DPR has their areas, but there are private places. We rented Washington Sports Club. We rented their gym and pool, and we had a swim team, and that's where our basketball team played because I had no gym the very first year. So there are other opportunities. I think some sort of council that would help them in facilities. How do I get equipment in terms of expense? How do I train my teachers and mentor those teachers to teach in where they are? And so if you're in a small space, how do you adapt that small space? Shape America has a million games. I've used them a ton, so rainy days and all that. So I think it comes down to those areas.
I've just got a couple of seconds left, 45 seconds left, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think that's absolutely a barrier. I have also seen a number of schools in my ward where the athletic budget kind of gets reallocated outside of the athletics, and I think that's an issue that we need greater oversight from the council or DCPS on. But what about scheduling during the day? The PE standards should also be met during the day. Does the emphasis, I don't want to say overemphasis, but the emphasis on math, reading scores detract, or how can we consolidate those so that we're getting those literacy and math lessons during the physical activities?
And I'm sure you can speak, there are ways to incorporate. We actually have a double math, double English for our sixth graders if they need catching up. So there are ways to do it through your recess time, through your lunchtime. We have lunch clubs, we have lunch soccer that we do. So there are ways to implement it. It's just, okay, here's what do you have? Let's look at it. Now let's plan for it and make sure we get those 60 minutes and go. So I think it's just a planning and looking. And I think there are schools that are just not putting the effort in sometimes and kind of letting it go.
Ms. Wilson-Family.
Thank you all for your time this evening and your testimony. I'm curious about two things. One, when you reviewed the standards and whatever role you participated in developing the standards, did you hear any disagreement about what should be included? And could you share a little bit about what that disagreement might be? And the second is, as you likely know, we're having ongoing discussions about the Every Child Succeeds Act and the implementation in Washington, D.C. In your professional opinion, should there be some kind of accountability at the school level associated with physical education?
Who's that directed?
That can be for anybody.
So I think I've heard no objections to these standards. I think they're embraced. The issue is implementation. And your second question was the accountability, and I think that it's certainly important to have accountability in terms of coursework. But the thing that gets missed is accountability for the health of our students. And physical education's one measure of that. I would argue that trips to the principal's office for discipline is another measure of health, and that reflects some of the issues that I raised, particularly this exposure to adverse childhood experiences, which would be expected to play out in terms of behavioral issues. And I think that even though non-health issues are recommended, they're not mandated. And I think that it would be very worthwhile to think critically and constructively about what kind of health measures could be used to assess school functioning, particularly since these kinds of measures have an impact on learning.
I will tell you, if there's not accountability, it's going to be it's not going to be taken as seriously as it should be. Definitely needs to be some form. I don't think it's punitive, but encouragement, and I agree that there needs to be, are you meeting those standards, and how are they playing out in the nurse's office visits and discipline and so on?
Right. Just to add to that, what gets measured gets done.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Kenning, could you speak a little bit to your role at DCPS? I'm assuming there's some sort of accountability mechanism or role that you're playing in this?
Yeah, so we're different from the charter schools because we run our physical education and health education centrally. So we get to provide professional development for teachers. That's district-wide professional development. And then for the past 8 years, 6 of those years, we benefited from the PEP grants, which allowed us to, one, provide resources for every school across the city. So that the first grant was just giving every school the basics, all of the teaching tools that you need, manipulatives and things like that. And then the second grant really focused on fitness, nutrition, and we were able to get things like heart rate monitors so that students can get that individual assessment of what's going on with their body during physical education time. And I just want to make sure that there's a clear distinction in DCPS between physical education and athletics. And so physical education, we're preparing students for a lifetime of activity. So our focus isn't on team sports. And, I would just ask the panel, when was the last time you played on a team sport? And you're still within your lifetime, right? So, hopefully you're exercising regularly with the skills and things that you learned. And hopefully, you haven't had to go to a personal trainer for that or anything like that. So I guess to answer your question about should there be accountability, I totally agree. But with the accountability, we need access to resources in order to make sure that we can do all of the things that our kids deserve.
Thank you. Ms. Wattenberg?
This bill builds on Joe Whedon's question. I think the second person here, I think that you quoted some data, school-based data, and you indicated a percentage or a number of students who were not meeting the HSA, and I was just wondering, what is the data and can you tell us anything about those numbers?
Yeah, I think they come from the school health profiles, which are self-reported, self-reports from schools about the extent to which they're meeting PE or recess requirements. The problem is with the self-report. And for example, that if a school reports in the fall and that's when they're providing physical education, it may seem that they're meeting the standard, but that they're not reporting for the full school year. So I think the assurance that a school is providing these activities would be to look at the school schedules as an outcome measure. And it may be that's a harder measure, but one which is probably more reliable in terms of scheduling of PE, for example.
And based on the data that you do have, what portion of schools weren't meeting the PE
The majority of
requirements?
schools are not meeting the physical
not meeting them.
education requirements. Some schools are, and this comes back to the earlier question about what are the barriers. And I think one of the most important barriers is space. And one of the things that Miriam has taught us is that the unoccupied space in schools may be on the roofs of schools, which could be converted into spaces for physical activity. And I think we're unsure of what the engineering challenges are with respect to that, but that's unused space and space that could be profitably used to increase physical activity resources.
Well, thank you all very much, and thanks to everybody who's involved in putting the standards together and for giving us a sense of the implementation challenge.
Thank you.
I'm
sorry.
I have one quick question. This is for the gentleman third down. Your testimony spoke a little bit about some of the differences between boys and girls, even though we have that we're still seeing in gym classes, even though we have Title IX. Could you elaborate about that a little further?
So I think I'm addressing two issues. One is after-school sports, which is definitely separate from physical education as a 28-year PE teacher. So definitely what I see, and it may generate from the physical education classes not getting enough. For example, basketball is a very big sport in Washington, D.C. However, I've noticed there are a lot more boys teams than girls teams, and sometimes schools have trouble even fielding a girls teams and sometimes they don't really push it, to be honest. And for me, that's something, we have more girls teams than boys teams right now. So I think, but that could generate from PE, but I don't want to say it may or may not, but do the girls feel like they're competent enough, or is that something they want to do? I do know in other schools I've taught in, if in the PE from kindergarten up, if they feel confident in their movements and they feel like they can try something without being ridiculed, that they'll try sports just to see, and so there'll be more activity. So I do notice overall that there is an issue that way. That's an observation. It's not a study, but I would like to follow that up in some way to see what the figures are on that.
Madam
Thank you.
President, very quickly. One, I was really excited when this was presented to us that we were going to have more of a focus on social emotional health. And when you think about that in the physical education sense, sometimes you think about just general sportsmanship, behavior in team sports, things like that. But other than that, in terms of Strand 4, Standard 4, that says that a physically literate individual exhibits responsible personal and social behavior that respects self and others. Other than that, what ideally would we be engaging young people around in the classroom or during the school day around something like that?
I'm not sure I get your question.
Well, so I was saying, in terms of kind of the social-emotional standards, we talked about kind of personal and social behavior. Other than the things we inherently think of, like sportsmanship and things like that, are there any other things that we should emphasize educators to do or engage our students around inside the classroom in relation to that?
Well, I think the main point is the difference in the standards and the way they're created is they're not around competition, and so competition brings out the cheating and the lack of sportsmanship and those types of things. So it's more about personalized and individual challenges and making sure that students have that that understanding of how to analyze their fitness levels, create goals that are achievable, track their goals, and do that. And all of that brings about someone who cares about their fitness, their personal health, and then they can, advocate for more opportunity, more playable spaces, more things like that in their community. So that's a social responsibility that is created from, taking that individualized approach versus a competitive approach in physical education. Is that?
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. It's a great question. So with the IB physical education, which we also follow the Shape America, they're intertwined. So we look at, kind of like my story, empathy, which is really difficult to teach in a sense, but we can model it and show it. And then in a class, I may talk about integrity. It could be a simple tag game. And, when no one's looking, and you get tagged, do you freeze or what? So do you have integrity? So integrity and caring. So those are some of the big things: empathy, caring, and integrity. Obviously respect. I feel like respect is almost overused with the kids, so we try to go another way. We will also use Google Classroom, and they'll have to reflect on a game or something they did. So incorporating those, but not just to say it during the class, but that we talk about it and reflect about it. And that's, I agree, that's a very important thing, because if you can play on a team, then you can be in a workplace and you can understand dynamics and makes you more valuable. And I agree with the individualized, if they enjoy the sport, because we try to make it fun so they can continue on. So it's all those put together. And I don't know how many of you could say, yeah, I had a bad PE experience, or I hate PE, and that's what we're trying to guard against, is that you just enjoy it. And that's why the equipment for individual, we're doing bocce ball right now, just different things that the kids can try.
Thank you, panel. Thank you for testifying to us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to try to go back to our public panel. There's Marilee Holmes, Executive Director, Total Sunshine. Ashley Taylor, Ward 8 resident. Is she here? Myra Martin, Parents Amper from PAVE. Donna Richards, DC parent. Dana Richards. And Mazara Stevenson. All right, we'll begin on my right, your left. Please note that you have 3 minutes each. And your don't forget to turn on your microphones. Thank you, Marilee.
Good evening. I'm Marilyn Holmes. I'm the president of Total Sunshine Incorporated. We're a DC-based nonprofit 501c3 and also a television show. I'll tell you, it's always a pleasure to come out here, and it's always an honor to be able to come before this body and express all the interest I have in supporting DC students. I'll tell you, it's been quite a day for me, and I'm really glad that I made it. I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to testify, and I was so disheartened. But moving forward, Total Sunshine is the medic to society. I'm a paramedic. I've been working in medicine for the last several years. I'm not going to tell my age, but it's been more than 15 years. And I started Total Sunshine because I saw a need for the young people to hear from medical professionals about what they were seeing out here on the ambulance. And I've done many anti-violence life coping skills seminars with a lot of the young people in the city over these last 15 plus years. Just to give you a small snapshot of what some of the activities of our Total Sunshine school grade incentive program. Let's see. I'll start at the bottom. We've supported 448 DC students with Tools for Success in the classroom. We've done 74 community events. We've attended them and filmed the people that are there to support the community. We've done 72 in-school life coping skills anti-violence seminars. We've supported 520 DC valedictorians and salutatorians. I'm especially proud of that. And we've also, we're actually working on show number 126. It airs on DC TV and Fairfax. And it's always inspirational programming. It's always something that we hope to bring a smile to people's faces. And it's always a pleasure, of course, to keep on doing as we do. Our school grade incentive program is essentially the vehicle that we use to impact young people in our city. And this year is no different. We're looking forward to our 9th annual Total Sunshine School Grade Rewards Ceremony, where we're going to gather all of the valedictorians and salutatorians from the city, roughly 70 students. Public schools, charter schools, it doesn't matter. If you did the best in your school, the top 2 graduates are going to be eligible to come to our event and receive a laptop or a tablet to further their educational success in college. We of course want these young people to come back to the city and bring those talents, and we're really proud of them. This year it's going to be June 22nd. We're looking at the Rise Center again, and I'm so hopeful to see each and every one of you there with your clapping hands ready, because there's nothing to do but clap at this ceremony for these stellar young people who have gotten straight A's in school for the last 4 years, more likely. These are the 4.0 students. These are the ones we don't have to worry about out there doing the wrong thing. They know what to do when it comes to being diligent in school, and we always make a good point to recognize them and give them whatever we can. And it's unfortunate, but I'll tell you, it's been a struggle for us to keep these young people supported. I'm currently recruiting a fundraising committee to help to see what we can do about keeping the school grade incentive program supported. If people want to know more about Total Sunshine or our efforts in the community or to support students, they can feel free to log on to totalsunshine.org or give us a call on the Sunshine line at 202-575-0462. One other small note, I've been teaching EMS in this area for quite some time. There are a lot of field providers that have been trained by me. I've just actually reconnected with the American Heart Association, and I'm going to be teaching CPR in the community and also for healthcare providers. And so if someone wants to see about that, they can feel free to go to our website as well or get in touch. They can email me at info@totalsunshine.org. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'll look forward to continuing to supporting young people.
That's it. Thank you. Ms. Taylor.
Oh, it's on. Good evening. My name is Ashley Taylor, and I am a Ward 8 resident and a parent of an awesome 2-year-old named Strummer, who will start school this coming fall. I'm here tonight to share with you my perspective as a parent of a child about to enter our public school system. I am strongly in favor of a citywide, cross-sector accountability system that is easy for families like mine to understand while searching for schools. In addition, I encourage the State Board of Education to ensure that academic measures are the focus of the system. I have just applied for schools for Strummer on the My School DC application, so the experience of searching for school options is fresh on my mind. I explored both charter and DCPS options. I went to EdFest and I searched online. I went to many, many websites to find more information about schools. It was frustrating that I didn't have one place I could go for all the information. Since the data was so scattered, I ended up relying most heavily on my friends and professional contacts to give me suggestions. I'm lucky to have a strong network of people I can ask for advice on these questions, but I am worried about the parents who aren't so lucky. When I did my research, the most important factor in finding a school for Strummer was academics. It's not the only thing our family values, but it's a non-negotiable. I do care about making sure she has access to the arts, and I don't think testing is the only thing that matters. I'm interested in schools that offer a wide range of activities and programming. However, I want to make sure Strummer is prepared for middle school, high school, and beyond. And so the academic success of the school is critical for me. I request my board representative from Ward 8, Marcus Batchelor, and all board members to work with OSSE to ensure we create a common accountability system for all public schools that takes into account a variety of measures, but primarily focuses on academic performance and growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Martin?
Sure.
Good evening, DC State Board of Education members, Superintendent Kang, and staff. My name is Maya Martin, and I'm a Ward 1 resident. I'm also the founder and executive director of PAVE, Parents Amplifying Voices in Education, whose mission is to empower, connect, and train charter parent leaders to give families in DC a voice and a choice in the vision for education in our city. At PAVE, we believe that parents are partners and leaders in developing a diversity of safe, nurturing, and great schools for every child in every ward and community. Last month, PAVE hosted 9 events with 8 council members and a deputy mayor for education in honor of National School Choice Week. And in those events, one of the things that parents made clear in their stories of choice was that they were looking for the best schools for each of their children. And they did not care what type of school that it was, as long as it was a great school. In our one-on-one meetings with parents, they've said the same. Time and again, we've learned that what parents care most about is how each school educates their child. As both a fifth-generation Washingtonian and someone who founded an organization in our city with an all-parent governing board, I've been particularly engaged in the conversations around the Common Accountability Framework proposed by OSSE. I appreciate the Every Student Succeeds Act, pushing states to think critically about state accountability measures, since our charter schools parents have used these measures through resources like the PCSB Performance Management Framework to make the difficult decision of choosing a school for their children. OSSE's current proposal for a common accountability framework would create a clear system that is tied to student outcomes that parents care about. 3 of our parent board members have submitted testimony about the importance of having a single accountability system in our city that can help parents to identify the best school options for their students regardless of sector, DCPS or public charter schools. I'd like to share some of that with you today. Cecily Miles Slater, a multi-generational Washingtonian herself and a Ward 5 resident, shared about her own search for her children's schools. When researching which schools would be a good fit for my children, I'd read greatschools.org, myschooldc.org, dcurbanmoms.com, as well as dcpcsb.org. In addition, I spoke to parents in my network that had kids in charter schools. I relied heavily upon the PCSB's PMF system. I studied the reports on the schools my kids were matched with and was encouraged to find that they were Tier 1 and Tier 2. I feel very strongly about sending them to schools that are succeeding in delivering quality education to their students. I was also concerned about the school climate, diversity, and college readiness. It was great to be able to find all of this in one place. Erica Harrell, a Ward 7 resident who had to search for new DC schools for her children from California, shared this about her own search. When selecting schools for my kids, my husband and I relied heavily on OSSE and PCSB's rating system as a preliminary step. We also looked through LearnDC, dcschoolreform.org, myschooldc.gov, as well as individual school websites to determine whether or not a school was the right fit for either of our children. Performance was our beginning and ending determining factor because ultimately we wanted a school with a strong track record for excellence and which we felt and still feel our children deserve. We relied little on parent input because in the end, quantitative data matters, not just what other parents think is best for their children. The tier system that PCSB uses was particularly helpful because it was simple yet comprehensive. It was yet a comprehensive measure for identifying schools that fit our criteria. And LaJoy Johnson Law, a Ward 8 parent of a special needs student, shared this about her search. Abria is a special needs child that was born at 23 weeks gestation. In selecting a school, I look at the special education department, school's character, extracurricular activities and programs, teacher and leader assessment, and the overall success rate by the PCSB PMF system of the school. When Abria was attending NCC, National Children's Center, she was recommended to several charter schools. At the time, I was not aware of the 2 public sectors for children's education. As a parent, I just wanted the best school, public or charter, that fit my child's needs. I then made the decision for Abria to attend Appletree PCS, and I based this decision on the PCSB PMF system and the strength of the special education department. We support OSSI's current proposal because we have heard from many parents from communities and experience across the city say the same, and we believe it is the best way to help inform parents about our children's academic performance and growth. Creating a common accountability framework for a public education system with over 90,000 students is no easy task, and so I would like to sincerely thank our policymakers and elected officials at OSSI and the State Board for their hard work creating something that reflects the needs and concerns of parents as they search for the best school for their children. Reflecting on my conversations with parents from all different wards, backgrounds, and schools, I would also like to advocate for our common accountability process to be looked at closely for the tenets of equity and fairness. Parents care about finding a great school for their child, and we should take our cues from them as we put aside the way things have been done and move towards the way things should be done to serve all of our children, regardless of sector, but with regards to equality and quality. Thank you, State Board of Education members, for working hard to ensure that all of our children have access to great schools and that make them feel a joy for learning every single day and ensure that they graduate ready to succeed in college, career, and beyond.
Thank you. Mr. Richard?
Hi, good evening. Board members, staff, Superintendent Kang, and commenters and attendees. Thank you for this opportunity and for your work on updating DC schools' physical education standards, which is a very important activity, and particularly at this time with the pending reorganization of DC athletics associations and passage of the DC Athletic Equity Act of 2015. So this is presents great challenges and opportunities for DC schools and students attending them, especially with the physical education curriculum, because it's the day-to-day, week-to-week, I guess, opportunity for students to participate in athletic activities and to learn about physical fitness and to actually do physical fitness. It seems a primary question is whether physical fitness, as distinguished from fitness literacy, will be the central component of an exceptional physical education curriculum. I have a revised statement which I submitted today, and there's several clarifications I made from the last posting. And I added a couple paragraphs at the end, which I'm not going to cover tonight, but you can read it. It's about the last two paragraphs are about what has happened on the world stage with regard to athletics, and recently with regard to the U.S. and Iran, and very positive development. So at the Athletic Equity Act hearings, the issue arose of whether DC should remain the only jurisdiction outside of Mississippi that does not sponsor a key core physical fitness sport, which is wrestling. And others argue, in addition, swimming and gymnastics, and I'm certainly not opposed to that. I think the more the students are challenged and the more rigorous the activities and sports programs, the better. The better they're going to do physically in terms of physical fitness, lifelong skills, and academically. And I don't have all the data on that, but I think if you look at the philosophies of all the best private schools in DC, you'll see that they have a very strong focus on both physical fitness and academic excellence. So, and the rest of my statement is there. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Stevenson?
Hi, my name is Mazaria. I'm from C.W. Hurst. My school recess, we go to lunch at 1:05, and we go out for recess at at 1:40 or 1:45, and we only get 15 minutes. We only get like 10 or 15 minutes to play, and sometimes they take our recess away. Last week at school, they took both fifth grade classes recess away for the whole entire week, and we didn't get to go outside none that week, and we wanted to, and sometimes they take half of our recess, so we only get like 1 minute to play. Sometimes they hold us back in the cafeteria and make us sit down, or make us walk around. We don't usually have our recess. We only have 1 day of recess because they usually make us do paragraphs, or they just take it away and we do laps around the school. We don't usually have our recess. The only time we will have our recess is on Mondays, or we would get it taken away that Monday, and we will have it on the next week if we would earn it. My teacher, Mr. McNair, he know about the law, about we supposed to have 30 minutes of recess, and they can't take it. 20, I'm sorry. And he don't really care about that law, but he still takes it. And sometimes if we don't finish the paragraphs that he give us, we have to stay behind, or we can't, or we stand on the wall at recess and watch the other kids play.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you, panel. You're dismissed now. Thank you.
Excuse me, Madam President.
Yes, sir.
Before you dismiss this panel, is it possible for the board, and I know it's not tradition, but we have done it before, to ask some of the panelists a question, please?
You'd like to ask a question, Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, in reference to, thank you. Ms. Ashley Taylor and Ms. Martin, a question in reference to your statements. Have you read the OSSE proposal and this is for both of you?
Yes.
No, I have not read the proposal.
You have not. But Ms. Martin, you have.
I have read it, yes.
Okay. So you're suggesting that we vote for it and adopt it in its present form, that the way they proposed it?
So yes, I mean, I can't speak for.
No, I'm asking you.
From my perspective, so when myself and my parents took a look at it, we thought that the construct of the proposal as it currently stands is strong. We thought it had a good balance of academic growth and performance measures, along with some of the other measures that are used to determine parent satisfaction, like re-enrollment and some of those components. So we think that as it stands currently, it's a strong measure.
Okay, as it has been proposed.
Yes. And what we appreciate is that OSSE has done the work to get parent input throughout the community and ward by ward meetings. And so we've shared those with our families. We've put them in our monthly newsletters. Families have known about them. They've been able to take a look at the document. We feel like the process has been collaborative and it's been based on best practices. So yes, our families feel comfortable.
Okay. Have you heard of any other proposals?
So yes, I've had myself conversations about other ideas. I haven't read all, but I've heard about other ideas about different performance measures and combinations of scores. So I've had those conversations and meetings. Yes.
Are you flexible on any of it?
So I mean, I think that, I think one of the challenges that there is that when you talk to families really want to make sure that they know that what they're receiving is objective information that's based upon academic performance and growth, which is the #1 reason that they're going to an accountability measure to figure out how well this school is doing. And when you talk to families, what they're also sharing is that when they have conversations with other families, that is a part of their process. And that's what all of my families said in their testimony, that they're doing that, right? They're going to places and talking to their friends, and they're looking at DC Urban Moms and Dad, which is all subjective, subjectivity. And so they're doing that work on their own, but what they want to make sure of is that when they're getting a measure from a state agency or from a government entity that they can trust, they're getting something that is objective. They know the sources and the ways to go about getting those subjective measures, but they also want to know something that's going to tell them what the academic performance of the school is, which when you talk to parents is the main reason that they're sending their child to certain schools. There is a satisfaction component that they want to get from different family members, but the main reason that they're looking at a school is, will my child be able to graduate ready to go to college? Are they going to be able to progress and do well and be able to succeed around the measures that we know they need to that come out of school? So reading, writing, mathematics.
Okay, thank you.
Madam
Mr. Richard,
President.
just a quick question. Sir, I have a quick question for you. Were you a wrestler?
Yes.
You were.
In high school and college and then beyond.
Okay, good. So you'd like to see wrestling in DC public
Actually
schools?
starting in about maybe 6th grade.
You'd like to see wrestling in DC public schools?
In DC, I helped coach at Sidwell.
Right.
And also at American University at the college.
I'm talking about DC public schools.
DC public schools, no, I've helped a couple of the schools.
Which schools?
On occasion. Let's see. I can't think of,
No, that's okay. I just asked because I'd like to see wrestling in DC public schools.
Well,
I don't
Wilson
think
is the only.
I know that.
Yeah.
Is the only school. I'm a former wrestler. Our board member, Mr. Lockridge, was a former wrestler. And I know there have been challenges, but that's another, but I'd like to see wrestling in DC
Well,
public
I think
schools.
you can't have it, students traveling to another school all across town. They're just not going to do it. And so it's a sport that really, it doesn't require a lot of space. And I think once it's introduced through PE, then you have mats, and then you necessarily also have coaches and others coming in. And, wrestling is a foundation sport, as you know.
Yes.
And it makes the athletes, the students, it improves their performance in all other sports in terms of their strengths, balance, endurance, stamina.
Thank you. I did want to ask you that, but I wanted to ask the ladies if they read the proposal. But thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Thank you.
Madam-
Thank you for testifying.
Madam President, just very quickly, I know this is not the regular order of business, but I did want to say, one, to Ms. Taylor, I appreciate your comments, and I definitely look forward to working with you, especially as we meet in Ward 8 later this month to have a more pointed discussion on this, about how we make sure that this accountability plan does just that. Like you, I'm definitely interested in making sure that we have a system that demonstrates the current academic success of all of our schools, and I know my interest since I joined the board has also been making sure to hold our schools accountable for those things that also contribute to academic success. So I look forward to striking the right balance in this plan, and so I thank you. And to Ms. Stevenson, thank you for coming and testifying before us. I know it's not easy at your age, but I appreciate your eloquence and for not only standing up for yourself, but for your peers, and that's very important, and I appreciate you for being a leader in that regard. We want to make sure, as you've heard our discussion, we want to make sure that you get as much physical time as possible at school, and we know, at least it's my opinion, that it shouldn't be taken away for disciplinary issues because it's a part of your education. So thank you for speaking up for that, and you can rest assured that this board will fight on your behalf. Thank you.
I still have 1 minute to go.
Thank you.
Still 2 minutes.
Thank you. Now we're going to call up Miss Antoinette Poindexter, student, Tyrone Wilkinson, student, Jaden Abney, Sammy Graves, and Murray McDuffie. Okay. Okay, I don't.
Hi, my name is Mark Killister. I wanted to talk about like when we in school, and I wanted to talk about when we in school, we should have more lunchtime because when we have lunch, because my class, Miss Lambert's class, we stayed back because the kids, they didn't want to follow directions, and she said we can stay in for lunch. And about time, when the time goes around, when we go down to lunch, we only have like 13 or 15 minutes of lunch. And I rest my case.
Is that all you have to say?
Yes.
Can you say your name again, please?
Mark Killister,
Thank you. And what school do you go to?
C.W. Harris.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Marcus East. I'm speaking on the behalf of Tyrone Weisman, and I'm talking about recess because we need more time, and that when we don't have time for recess, because we have a lot. Our schedule is a lot of time, and when we're talking in class, we get punished like paragraphs, and the paragraphs go up to 105, and if you don't write paragraphs in time, you can't have recess. Or if there's a field trip coming up, you can't go on the field trip, and that we need more time of recess. And Mr. McNee, he'd take 2 weeks of recess from us.
Hello, my name is Antoinette Poindexter, and I go to C.W. Harris. And I wanted to talk about recess because our Arabic teacher, Mr. J, one time he took 8 days of our recess, and we only had 2 days of recess, and our recess is only 15 minutes. And the 2 days that we did have recess, our math teacher, Mr. Spinner, took 5 minutes of our recess, so we only had 10 minutes of recess. And I wanted to say that I think we should have more than 15 minutes because like our schedule is a lot, and sometimes when we come in for recess and we only have like 5 minutes of recess, we will be like bunched up and stuff, and we'll be like yelling and screaming in the hallways and stuff and trying to get our recess time inside, like during specials and stuff, during recess, just trying to get our playtime during specials, because our teacher took our recess, and I think that we should really have like more than 15 minutes at our school, and our principal says that we only need 15 minutes, but if we only have 15 minutes and our teacher takes 10, then we only have 5 minutes. And the principal says that it's okay for the teachers to take away the recess. And the 5th grade teacher, Mr. McNair, said that he will keep on breaking the law of recess if it means that if he have to give his kids recess, he will keep on breaking the law. And I'm done. Thank you.
My name is Sammy Graves, and I go to C.W. Hurst Elementary School. And I want to talk about recess because my teacher, Mr. Spinner, threatened to take a month of recess from us, and we didn't have recess for 4 days of the week. And we don't get that much time in lunch, and that's all I have to say. Yes.
My name is Jaden Abney, and I would like to talk about recess because every time we line up to go to recess, as one person talk, they would tell us to go sit down, then they would punish all of us, and Mr. McNair, one time he threatened us to take 2 weeks of recess away from us, and every time we plan, he only give us 5 minutes, and then he tell us to line up, and then we go line up.
Thank you. Are you all in the same class?
No.
Us two. They're in the same class. They're
So,
fifth grade. we're
so this
fourth.
happens no matter what class you're in?
Yeah.
Thank you. You're in my ward, so we'll look into it. Okay? Miss.
I was just going to say thank you to all you students who came, and thank you to the teacher who brought you here today. We don't always know what's happening at the schools, and you're really speaking up so that we know what's happening and we know when the law is being broken. And you picked a really, really good day to come because the people responsible for that are sitting right here. And now they've heard it too. So if something isn't done, we want to hear back from you again. Thank you for coming tonight.
You had something else to say?
Before I moved to DC, I was in Oxon Hill, Maryland, and I went to a school called Glass Meadow Elementary, and they cut recess from 2nd grade all the way to 6th grade. So only the lower academy kids have recess, and all we did was after lunches come back, do our work, and wait to specials.
Thank you. So you've had trouble with recess for a long time, huh? Yeah. Well, hopefully we can do something about it. Thank you. All right. All right, for over a year, the State Board and RC have been soliciting input from the public, national and local experts, students, parents, teachers, and other stakeholders related to the new statewide consolidated plan required by the federal Every Student Succeeds Act. Before we hear from witnesses tonight, I believe Superintendent Kang would like to provide some comments on the draft accountability plan that we mentioned earlier.
So I don't want to hold us up any longer from hearing from the panels, but I think if there are points as we go along where I might just be able to provide clarification on the plan, it would be great just to have a chance to do that.
Thank you, Superintendent King. We have 3 panels of witnesses this evening, so I would ask all of our witnesses, if you have not already done so, to please email a written version of your testimony to SBOE at dc.gov so we can add it to our record. I will call names in groups of 4. Our first panel is Dr. Austin Nicholas, ABT Associates. Don Gordon, please come forward. Don Gordon, Senior Legal and Policy Advisor for Education Council. David Pickens, Executive Director of DC School Reform Now.
Madam President, Farhana Rabi, a peer educator, is going to take Mr. Pickens' place on the dais.
Okay. Frank Servich, Young Playwright Theater, and Dr. Jocelyn Klein from DC Chapter, American Academy of Pediatrics. Okay, yes, yeah. Where is this? All right, so why don't you 2 move up here? And I will call some people from the next panel, which are Elazir, Executive Director, DC Fiscal Policy Institute. Is he here? Yes. And Daryl Forte, PE teachers from DCPS. And one more. And Stephen Glazerman, Mathematica Policy Research. Is that here either? Okay. How about Josh Boots, Executive Director of Empower K-12?
We have 5 chairs.
We have 5. Thank you. I will begin from your right, my left. Just introduce yourself and then start your testimony. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Farhana Rabi. I'm a parent advocate with DC School Reform Now, and I'm giving testimony on behalf of David Pickens. Okay, good evening. My name is David Pickens, and I am the Executive Director of DC School Reform Now, an organization that seeks to educate, organize, and advocate to build support for public education strategies that prepare kids to become college and career ready. As someone who has been a leader at the school, district, and nonprofit levels, I appreciate the opportunity to comment publicly regarding potential changes to the DC school accountability system under the Every Student Succeeds Act. A major part of DCERN's work is to educate and inform parents as they navigate the school choice system, providing them with guidance on school quality as they apply for their children, and alerting them to quality schools that they might not have previously considered. DCERN does not independently evaluate public, traditional, and charter schools, but rather relies on the rating systems currently in place in order to make recommendations to parents. As DCERN advises families during the application process, it is critical that they acquire a thorough understanding of what makes a school quality, and additionally be able to compare many educational options via consistent objective criteria. Members of the State Board of Education have proposed that school accountability ratings should also take into account non-academic factors, and that these metrics should be given weight alongside student growth and proficiency. My organization agrees that a school's curriculum, extracurricular offerings, and parent surveys all have value and do help parents make application decisions, but they are not indicative of student outcomes, which is the only way to judge educational effectiveness. Additionally, supplemental offerings and feedback do not reflect the academic quality of the school and can make evaluations difficult to parse due to the lack of consistency between schools, as well as stakeholder and non-responder biases from survey data. Ratings based primarily on academic quality give parents a better picture of the academic rigor that the school has to offer their child and allows parents to accurately compare the academic quality of school options. As schools seek to prepare students for college, it must always be kept in mind that colleges themselves, while they do take into account letters of recommendation, extracurricular activities, and other merits, most highly rate a student's grade point average and test scores. If DC as a city seeks to prepare students for that level of evaluation, the schools that prepare them must also be evaluated on their ability to help students reach the necessary academic proficiency. Often we focus on school inputs, but emphasis must continue to be placed on student outcomes, as their grades and test scores have very real repercussions on their futures. Parents do use many metrics other than grades and test scores when evaluating a school, and many variables inform different priorities between families. Though parents take into account many factors when making decisions about the best school for their child, it is not necessary that every one of those factors be part of the government school accountability system, but would be more appropriate in a state report card, which could expand on the initial rating, thus providing additional context for families. Thank you.
So my name is Dr. Jacqueline Klein. I'm a pediatrician, and I represent the District of Columbia chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. DCAAP is the Washington, D.C. chapter of a national organization of 64,000 pediatricians. The D.C. chapter has over 400 members, including pediatricians, residents, and medical students from all of the district's hospitals, community clinics, private practices, and school-based health centers. As a pediatrician and member of the DCAAP, I and my colleagues have a vested interest in child well-being and health in schools. We feel strongly that the Every Student Succeeds Act provides an opportunity for following and improving on the health of children in our schools. We advocate that in order to learn, a child must be healthy, present, and nourished. We applaud DCPS and public charter schools for setting out to be the fastest improving state and city in the nation in student achievement outcomes. We support the ESSA draft that ensures greater equity in outcomes for our students by accelerating progress for those who are farthest behind. We feel that child wellness is a key component of reaching these goals, and that by including wellness markers in its ESSA proposal, DCPS and public charter schools will see further rise in student achievement. A key element to success in school is presence in the classroom. We recognize absenteeism as a potential area for improvement in DC public schools and charter schools. We fear that children who have chronic absenteeism are at a unique and increased risk of poor academic performance, as well as failure to graduate, both of which have significant downstream effects in the child or young adult's life. Chronic absenteeism data is already being collected by the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, so gathering this data would not pose a new burden on our schools. We advocate that DC public schools and charter schools use this data to focus efforts on school presence in those schools that have particularly high rates of absenteeism. The state of Oregon has served as an example of how this can be achieved. They collected data and then conducted focus groups with parents of children who were chronically absent. They identified barriers to attendance, including healthcare use or access, chronic illness, poor transportation, family responsibilities, and neighborhood safety concerns. They also collected data about aversions to attending school, including academic struggle, lack of engaging structure, poor school climate and ineffective school discipline, lack of transportation, parents' own negative school experiences, and uncertainty of new environments. Once barriers are identified here in the district, we could work to address them and improve our school attendance for all children. A measurable outcome under ESSA could be the incidence of chronic absenteeism in the district or the number of hours of time dedicated to focus groups and other preventive efforts by each school. A related issue to chronic absenteeism is school suspension and expulsion rates. As data is being gathered on chronic absenteeism, we would also recommend that these school reports include data on the number of children who are suspended or expelled each academic year. Once trends and rates are identified, then preventative efforts can be formed with achievable metrics for improvement across the district. We note that chronic illness is a contributing factor to chronic absenteeism and suspension expulsion, and would welcome partnering with DC Public Schools and charter schools as we represent the pediatricians of the district who serve your students. Another key element to academic success is a child's physical well-being. A child cannot succeed in the classroom if they are not well nourished. Food insecurity is a large determinant of pediatric health, and as pediatricians, we value what DCPS and public charter schools does for our patients by providing free and subsidized breakfast and lunch. We propose that as a part of ESSA, DCPS and public charter schools report the utilization of free and subsidized breakfast and lunch across the district. This would identify schools and zones within the district that have the highest incidence of food insecurity. A measurable metric of improvement could be providing guidelines and standards of what is offered to children in schools, implementation of a curriculum focused on healthy eating habits for children, and providing nutritional education materials to families. Chicago Public Schools have been a shining example by placing a focus on student wellness throughout nutrition. They have developed toolkits for school personnel, students, and parents, which set school standards for caloric and fat content of snacks offered at schools, also set standards for vending machine placement in schools, and mandate nutrition education for students, among other metrics. As DCPS and public charter schools states they hope to lead the nation by having the fastest improvement in student achievement, we hope you will use this opportunity to put a critical focus on student wellness to help make this goal a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Ed Lazier, and I'm the Executive Director of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. We're a nonprofit organization that works to promote economic opportunity for all DC residents and to reduce income inequality in the district through thoughtful policy solutions. I want to focus my remarks tonight on the portion of the ESSA State Accountability Plan that relates to measuring the achievement of low-income students, and I want to encourage the State Board to work with OSSE to create a variety of measures of low-income status to make sure that we're gathering information on the performance and school success of our poorest students. This is important because the current measure of disadvantaged students, as I understand it, is broad and covers a large share of students in DC public schools and public charter schools. And it's also important because we know that the deeper a child falls into poverty, the more likely they are to face circumstances that affect their ability to succeed in school. It's my understanding that the current measure of disadvantage for reporting of test scores is participation in free and reduced price lunch program. And this is likely to include a large group of low and moderate income residents for two reasons. First, eligibility for school lunch is up to 185% of poverty, or close to $30,000 for a family of three. And we know that many DC families have incomes far lower than that. Also, because we have a community eligibility option that makes some schools, all students qualify for free lunch, means that we could be counting some students who actually have incomes well above even that threshold. By contrast, we know from census data that there are many families that live at or below poverty in the district. For example, about 1 out of 4 children in the district lives below the poverty line, so well below that 185% standard. That's less than $19,000 for a family of 3. And in fact, 1 out of 8 children lives below half the poverty line, or less than $10,000 for a family of 3. Poverty is especially high east of the rivers, with roughly half of all children there living below poverty, compared to 13% of children elsewhere in the city. And we all know that the stresses of poverty directly affect a child's ability to succeed in school, that children who live in poverty have worse outcomes in terms of health, cognitive development, and emotional well-being, and that living in neighborhoods with high rates of poverty also have negative impacts on child success in school. We also know that the further a child falls into poverty, more likely their families to face affordable housing challenges, which is a huge and growing problem in the city, and that the lack of housing stability has particularly harmful effects on children if they are living in overcrowded conditions, unsafe conditions, moving frequently, or ultimately ending up experiencing homelessness. Finally, we know that the depth of a child's poverty matters, and that even modest income gains or differences can make a difference in a child's life. For example, one study found that increasing the income by just $3,000 for low-income families during the early childhood period was associated with children earning 20% more as adults when they were grown up. So for these reasons, we think it's important not just to measure disadvantaged students on that relatively broad standard, but to disaggregate the data to include some lower income standards as well. And I recommend two. One is to measure the test scores and performance of students who are in families receiving TANF. These are often the lowest income children in the city with parents that have little or no earnings. The maximum TANF cash benefit is about $500 a month for a family of 3, which means that most children in TANF families are in deep poverty. I don't have the exact numbers, but I believe that's roughly 30,000 children in the city. And second, we also can measure the test scores of children who are receiving SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. The SNAP eligibility level is 130% of poverty. So it's higher than the TANF standard, but lower than the current free and reduced price lunch standard. So it would just allow another breakout to identify students who are low income, but not quite as disadvantaged as those receiving TANF. This kind of disaggregation is important to understanding how well our schools are doing at educating low-income students, how well our schools are doing to close the achievement gap, and how best to target resources to improve academic outcomes for the most disadvantaged students. If we continue to use just the current measure, we'll not be as well informed on our success at meeting these important goals. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to testify.
Good afternoon. My name is Darryl Forte, health and physical educator at Burville Elementary School. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak before you. And I'm go between the Every Student Succeeds Act as well as the Standards for Physical Education. I think it's very important that we are here to increase student activity levels. I know at my school we participate in 45 minutes once a week for health and physical education, in addition to recess that they have, which is 30 minutes. I also believe that quality physical education is important to incorporate the standards into our practice. It's also important that students know the reasons why they're participating in certain activities, in addition to participating in activities that they may not be familiar with. We have the Biking in the Park program, which teaches second graders how to participate properly in riding bikes, as well as putting on helmets and being able to enjoy just riding a bike. And it was amazing to me to see the number of students that were not able to ride a bike in second grade. Things that I enjoyed as a child, students today do not have the opportunity to participate in because of the climate. They may not have a safe neighborhood to do those things. So I think it's important that the Every Student Succeed Act incorporate physical education to a standpoint of bring it to the level of ELA and math subject areas, because it's important for the child, it's important for the whole child, it's important that students realize that the lifelong activities that they're learning in class, it carries with them over to college, high school, after college, if they want to participate in adult programs. So it's important that they understand the lifelong aspects of physical education. Also like that in DCPS, we have measurements. Students are able to participate in the surveys for the bike program. We have school profiles through Let's Move and Action for Healthy Kids, where schools are able to see where they stack up versus other schools, and see and understand the things that they need to work on as far as incorporating more physical activity or more recess time in their schools. That's pretty much it.
Good evening. My name is Josh Boots, Executive Director of Empower K-12, and I've been before this group before. I just wanted to know that I have participated on the ESEA waiver accountability system and the Public Charter School Board's performance management framework. And my comments are around the ESSA accountability system. I have been involved in several conversations with various stakeholders over the last couple of months about the ESSA accountability system. In general, nearly everyone is in agreement that there is plenty to like about OSSE's Consolidated Plan Accountability Framework. The framework emphasizes achievement and academic achievement and growth for all students and subgroups. It includes additional measures of school success like chronic absenteeism, graduation rate, and student re-enrollment rates. The summative ratings are broken down into 5 groups, which will help stakeholders distinguish the quality amongst their educational options. And schools identified for additional state support, comprehensive and targeted, will maintain that status for up to 3 years, which would ensure lasting and effective engagement. These are the great aspects of the OSSE proposal, and they build on the accountability work efforts in DC over the last 10 years. The basis of the accountability system, the theoretical basis is solid. We have several minor recommendations for the State Board of Education and OSSE staff to consider before final submission to the U.S. Department of Education. Though I do suspect that most of these recommendations would be better considered by a technical working group that would support OSSE once the plan has been approved by the Department of Ed later this summer. But our recommendations do include that first, that the OSSE and the State Board of Education consider variable weighting for achievement and growth by school based on their students' prior achievement. For example, schools with lower achievers would have more emphasis placed on growth over achievement. The reason why we recommend this is that we still see that even with the accountability systems that we've had that have emphasized both achievement and growth, that lower achievers in the District of Columbia are still failing to grow at the same rates as other lower achievers nationwide. So the emphasis on growth, especially for schools that are accepting lots of lower achievers, we believe is important. 2, that we place additional emphasis on the achievement of students in a school's terminal grade, especially for students who have been at the school for multiple years. So our kids who are leaving schools prepared for college and career. 3, we would expect that there may be tighten the alignment between the growth to proficiency measures for English language acquisition and PARC. 4, that there's a reconsideration of the reliability of subgroups within sizes between 10 and 24 in the accountability score. 5, that OSSE and the State Board analyze whether the current subgroup weightings would mask within school achievement and subgroup gaps. We do like to reemphasize that we are impressed by OSSE's proposal that includes subgroups. Just wondering if there is potential that some achievement gaps might be masked by the current weighting system. 6, that the group research the reliability of class observations for accountability purposes, and whether the measure of early childhood learning environments could be extended to include both kindergarten through 2nd grade, not just pre-kindergarten. And 7, reconsider whether the state should target 2038-39 as the year for meeting goals, or whether we should set a more aggressive target 5 or 10 years from now to meet our goals. We will submit all of our details concerning our recommendations later in the public comment period, so they will be available. And again, we believe that the OSSE ESSA plan has the right ingredients for approval. A quality technical advisory committee will help ensure that the plan is implemented with fidelity and in the best interests of all of our students and parents.
Thank all of you for testifying. Superintendent Kang, would you like to respond to any of this testimony?
Yeah, just briefly, and again, I'll just limit my comments to any clarifications that might be needed about the contents of OSSE's plan. On the goals piece, I'll just note that while the ultimate long-term goal we set was for 20 years out, that we also speak to trying to aggressively cut caps in half over a 10-year period and set interim annual goals as well. So just for clarification.
Board members, we can now have one round of questioning. Mr. Batchelor?
No, thank you, Madam President.
Somebody else go? So I'm trying to figure out how to divide my questions here with my few minutes. Let me start with Mr. Lazier and ask you, what is to be gained by disaggregating according to these different categories? That is, what do we misunderstand when we don't disaggregate like that, and what could we do better if we did disaggregate?
I mean, to the extent that we might find out, and not surprisingly find out, that the greatest academic challenges are faced by the children who are in the poorest families, those, for example, who are in families receiving TANF cash assistance, that might help schools make individual decisions, or you all make decisions about how to target resources. To the extent that you're covering, the current measure includes children with incomes that may be well below $10,000 and families all the way up to $30,000. It's just, you may be missing the children who most need extra academic support to succeed in school.
And I just want to jump in, and I agree with Ed on that one. We are collecting data around the OSSI at-risk category, which includes kids that are on receiving SNAP and TANF benefits. So to not use it as a potential at-risk or subgroup category, I think we are missing it.
One thing that's been raised with me is that you could have schools that had much poorer populations and schools with less poor populations, and they would look similarly poor, and one would have much greater growth and proficiencies than the others, and that you could misunderstand that it was the quality of the school or the lack of quality of the school as opposed to this. Is that a...
I think that's totally fair. I had intended before the meeting, but didn't just have a chance to do it, to look at some different schools, because my guess is that many schools have pretty high participation in free and reduced price school lunch, but yet may have very different profiles of the students, including very different income profiles. So I do think that it is masking what may be substantial differences between schools, and therefore substantially misgauge how well schools are performing relative to their low-income students.
Let me use that to jump off and ask Mr. Boots a question, which is, when you look at the proposal that exists, how concerned are you, or how concerned should we be, or what questions should we ask in order to make sure that we don't inaccurately or misleadingly identify schools with very low ratings when in fact they may have high growth? Because when I think about the rating system, I think there's all kinds of useful information we can get from the rating system. All rating systems have downsides as well, and it seems to me the greatest possible downside could be, especially in a system of school choice like we have, if you give a school gets a very negative rating, and maybe because the kids come in with low scores and they grow a lot, it's really a school that's on the up and up, it's really growing its students, and it gets a very low rating, that the worst possible results of this system could be to misleadingly rate that school badly, because it would lead to an outflux of students, an outflux of funds, an outflux of programming. And here we would have had a very successful school serving a group of students who need very good schools, and it would be hurt. So my question is, given the 50-50 split of proficiency and growth, do you have any concerns that schools that are growing their kids well could be caught with a low rating?
I would say probably not. In terms of our prior, we've done research on looking at using the median growth percentile data from the performance management framework for charter schools and comparing that to the school's achievement. There's a pretty strong correlation between the achievement score and the growth score. So while it's probably theoretically possible, no, I actually don't even know if it's theoretically possible. I think OSSI would know necessarily that based off of, because the growth measure is part median growth percentile and part growth to proficiency. We don't have access to all that data to be able to look at that, but my suspicion is the fact that high growth schools also tend to have higher achievement just because they're pushing more kids across the bar for achievement. That a high growth school would end up with a low rating at 1 or 2 stars is probably very remote, is my guess.
Even if it had, I mean, our high schools, for example, have proficiency rates that are in the teens, even lower. So even with those levels of proficiency rates, you think that if it was above 50%.
Right. If they're moving kids compared to the rest of the kids, and if their kids are having high growth and they're on the path to proficiency, my suspicion is that they will not have a low 1 or 2 star rating. Again, OSSI would be able to prove that with data,
okay.
But my suspicion is that no.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Phil, Laura.
I just had one question for Mr. Boots. You mentioned, sorry, I had your testimony up and I closed it. It was your third point of things that you wanted to change. Do you remember? Sorry. Let me pull it back up.
My third point specifically was to look at the alignment of the growth to proficiency measures for the English language acquisition, the access test, and PARCC.
Oh, sorry. No, it's the N sizes. So I wanted to better understand. You said reconsider the reliability of including subgroups with N sizes between 10 and 24. Why are you using the word reliability? Could you explain that a little bit more about what your concerns are?
Yes. So an N size of 10 is pretty small. That would be pushing it in terms of, if you look at other states and what they are looking at in terms of N sizes, most are in the 20 to 30 range in terms of using it for accountability. Now, for reporting purposes, I think 10 is a good size for reporting purposes. Now, whether the measures themselves, if you could, basically what I mean by reliability is if you could take 10 kids of the same subgroup and then randomly select 10 out of a huge group, let's say the group was 100, but we were reporting on just 10, we randomly selected 10 out of 100, would we end up getting a similar subscore for that same group of 10, no matter whether it was like any group of 10 within that 100, right? Because the sample is 10, those 10 are meaningful, but they're just a small sample size of all of our kids. So what I mean by reliability is like, is the measure strong enough in terms of its overall scientific validity and reliability to be able to handle the fact that like any group of 10, like that a school's performance with those subgroup of 10 is meaningful and repeatable and reliable. So that if we see an issue with that group of 10, is that actually because of the group of 10 students or because of the school's performance with those 10?
I would be curious, Mr. Lazier, given your background in research, whether you would concur with that concern.
I'm sorry, I don't actually feel like I know enough about it, but I'd be happy to talk with you further about it.
Right now, the reportable N size is 25, and the recommendation is to reduce that to 10. In part because the diversity in our schools, we lose track of actually how many of our students are doing because there is an N size of less than 10 in so many of our schools based on race right now. And so if we really want to see how students are doing by race, you do have to lower the N size. There's so many years where you can see the pockets of data where it starts off where you can start to track it, and then maybe one student will leave the class and there will only be 24. Yeah. You can no longer see what's happening.
For reporting purposes, 10 is a good number to look at, but to hold a school accountable, say it's possible that like if we're talking about a group size of 10, that could be 1 or 2 families, right? And so should we be holding a school accountable in terms of like potentially dropping a star because they had an issue with serving just one family out of hundreds of families that school serves? So I just don't know, like, we would have to look at the data. Again, I don't have access to enough data because we haven't been reporting an N size of 10, so I wouldn't know whether that's, if you could look at the validity and reliability over the last 5 years and see if things are the same, but.
I mean, my instinct is that a sample size of 10 is too small to give you something that you would want to make decisions on and make assessments based on. It's a pretty small sample size.
And yeah, go ahead and clarify. Yeah.
Just a quick clarification. So one thing is, one of the reasons why we've looked at actually having a single N size requirement instead of separate ones for accountability and for reporting is in DC, given our choice environment, often reporting and accountability purposes are hard to distinguish from each other. And so having 2 different N sizes led to very similar data appearing differently in different places and causing a lot of confusion, not just for suppression, but literally if you meet both N sizes, in one place a school's proficiency rate might be shown as 26%, in another for the same grade and subject 25%, and it might be because of an N size difference and aggregations, right? So that was one thing we'd heard in terms of just consistency. And then the second thing is, I think in order to address the point that Josh is making around one family leaving or coming, causing a difference in the accountability rating, in addition to N size, we've built in a different feature in the system called a minimum points possible threshold, which we're happy to follow up and talk about more. It's a little technical.
Madam President, I know I'm at time. Can I ask another quickie? No, it's okay. I just wanted to ask Dr. Klein, it was hard for me to discern from your testimony whether you were recommending that our schools be held accountable for various health components. and whether you're recommending I think all of us would concur that those are really important for the growth and well-being of children. I wanted to better understand whether you're actually recommending a shift in what's included in the accountability framework.
I mean, I guess, yes. When I reviewed it, I just didn't see any mention of child health, nutrition, anything about like chronic illness contributing to absenteeism. I saw a lot of things about absenteeism, but nothing about, partnering with pediatricians or people to understand we have very high rates of asthma in the district. Is that leading to a lot of absenteeism? Could we be partnering with schools to get, a better understanding of asthma education in our schools to help our students? Things like that. I was just kind of surprised by the absence of mention of any of it.
Okay, so and just a quick point of clarification, so this is accountability system, so it's the set of things we're holding schools accountable for versus reporting out. So there's lots more that schools are reporting out on. So finding the data is the point you're most interested in, so that we can address what's going on, I think that is possible. I'm not sure if it's fully possible with what we collect now, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that at another time. But I'm curious about whether you think schools should be held accountable for that.
I think similar to what other people have said in past testimony, unless there's an accountability component, I just worry that it won't happen at all. So I think putting some language into the ESSA guidelines for DC, like other places have done, I think would, hold our schools more accountable to make sure that our kids are healthy.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Lazier, I have just basically a few questions in reference to the TANF and SNAP recipients. I agree that we could probably have more data out of this accountability. But do we need that to determine that families who are TANF and SNAP typically perform worse than the families who are better off? And do we really need that for us to have a discussion on, as you suggested, how we redistribute our resources? Because we've studied this for decades of studies on how the alignment of poor families and how they perform in schools, and they don't perform as well as the wealthy families. So I'm just trying to follow the value there of desegregating that.
Yeah. And I guess if the issue is trying to assess to measure accountability and measure a school's outcomes, to compare two different schools, which is what would happen here, right? You'd be looking at two different schools that might have the exact same profile in terms of number of children who are disadvantaged using a free and reduced price lunch standard, could have very different profiles in terms of how many children they have who are on TANF, for example. And so it would help better understand what might be explaining the difference in performance between two different schools if you had information not only on who's low income, but who's extremely low income.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to thank the panel for coming. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Joe.
So I'd like to thank you all for being here. There are a couple things I wanted to kind of touch on. First, 100% agree, and I think we've heard this time and time again, all parents want a high-quality school. Sad fact of the matter is not all parents have access to a high-quality school right now, and we need to move forward and do a better job of measuring academic achievement. And I'd like to say, Mr. Boots, I like the idea of a stronger emphasis on a terminal grade. I think that's really the measure. Are we graduating students? Are we promoting students who are ready to succeed? There's been a lot of dichotomy in the testimony. Folks who are saying we need to focus on those academic measures, and the need for clear objective data and using that to advocate for essentially test scores. The other side of the coin has been the impact of a well-rounded education. And I think there's a question about how do we get high-quality data that we can use for accountability if we bring in things around the richness of the curriculum, PE, minutes, other things. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, are there ways that we can measure some of these things objectively and use it for accountability? Because I think the research is pretty clear, and we've heard this earlier tonight. Access to PE promotes academic growth. Access to dual languages, languages immersion, all students achieve better. Diverse school body, student body, all students achieve better. So back to my question, how can we identify and accurately measure some of these factors? Because I think that's a critical thing to do if we're going to keep it in an accountability framework.
Great question, Joe. Lots of other states also assess students in science and social studies as part of a well-rounded curriculum. The state could choose to assess science and appropriate grade levels and social studies and appropriate grade levels. The District of Columbia has chosen not to do that. We do test science in 5th grade, 8th grade, and in biology. So it is possible that that could be folded in potentially somehow as part of the well-rounded curriculum. But I would strongly consider, like the state consider science and social studies as part of that well-rounded curriculum and assessing them reliably through, there are systems out there that can do that. That would be my recommendation.
I would also like to add that the unfortunate aspect of that is that students need to reach a certain number of ELA minutes and a certain number of math minutes. So that kind of goes into what each school is able to put into their schedule. Like I said, I only have 45 minutes that I see my students for one time a week. And of course, I know 60 minutes is the recommendation. So I guess it's really school dependent upon what they're able to fit into their schedule.
So this isn't my area of expertise, but I just would point out that I think everything you mentioned as other important factors are all measurable things. So I guess I don't know why it wouldn't be possible to come up with measures to distinguish within those factors.
Yeah. And to the point on the PE minutes, I think we've heard tonight when students get 30 minutes of recess or 20 minutes of recess. They don't. So there has to be a transparency in that data, and there has to be some level to prevent the manipulation of that data if it's going to be in an accountability framework. Any thoughts on how we can do that from a teacher's perspective, or is it just public relations? If it's public, parents are going to hold people accountable.
Well, I guess the reason why we're here tonight, just getting the word out to schools that the 60-minute is very important. And then that way schools will have to adjust their schedules.
Thank you all.
Again, thank you very much for coming to testify tonight. Appreciate the information. Thank you. All right, for our next panel, Crosby Hunt.
We'll go back.
Catherine Bellinger, Scott Abbott, and Jess Smith. And Dr. Austin Nichols.
Is Crosby here?
He does not seem to be here.
Okay. I don't know. No, okay. Dr. Nichols, Dan Gordon. Stephen Glazeman. Since we're out of order, just have a seat, and when you begin your testimony, just please give us your name and your organization. We're going to start here, whenever you're ready.
Good evening, members of the State Board of Education. My name is Catherine Bellinger, and I am testifying on behalf of Democrats for Education Reform, a national policy and advocacy organization that advocates for access to high-quality public schools for all children. I serve as our DC director. I'm testifying tonight to urge the State Board of Education to support the state superintendent's proposed ESSA implementation plan, particularly with regard to the proposed school accountability framework. As context, Over the past 2 years, DFER has been active in supporting provisions within the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, as well as implementation of those provisions at the state level that we believe are crucial to advancing equity and ensuring that the most vulnerable children receive the education they are entitled to. We are very active in a coalition of child and civil rights advocates, including the Education Trust, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, the National Council of La Raza, and the National Center for Learning Disabilities. To quote from our recent coalition letter to Congress, our collective goals include state-adopted standards aligned with the demands of post-secondary education and the workforce, annual statewide assessment of all students in grades 3 through 8 and once again in high school, with a strictly limited exception for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, transparent, accessible reporting of data disaggregated by race, income, disability status, and English proficiency at the state, district, and school levels so that educators, parents, and students themselves have objective information on where they are on their journey to college and career readiness. And finally, statewide accountability systems that include achievement and graduation rate goals for all groups of students, rate schools in large part on the academic performance of all groups of students, and require action when any group of students consistently underperforms. And I've included a link to our coalition letter in my electronic testimony. Our policy team has carefully read through OSSE's proposed state plan for DC, and we believe the DC plan meets and in many ways exceeds these 4 criteria. Just as background, our team is led by Charlie Barone, our federal policy director, who has spent 20 years working on ESCA implementation and reauthorization on the Hill. He actually helped draft the key provisions within ESSA that maintain equity. We believe that the single summative score a school receives from 1 to 5 stars in the DC plan should primarily reflect the academic performance of students on college and career-ready exams, such as PARCC. Why is this important? When a parent or policymaker looks at a star rating, the rating should demonstrate whether a school is meeting its primary mission of preparing children to succeed in college and in life. A recent Mathematica study in Massachusetts concluded that students' PARCC scores are highly correlated with success in college. The researchers write, we found that the PARCC exam predicts college grades. Students with higher PARCC scores tend to receive higher grades in college. We realize, and as Joe has brought up, that questions around the weight of student test scores generate significant debate both in DC and nationally. However, it's our belief that if we are not honest with ourselves about how well our schools are educating children across demographic groups, particularly in the crucial foundational subjects of reading and math, we are reducing equity by distorting the picture of school performance. Both parents and policymakers deserve transparency around both a school's academic performance overall and any significant gaps in achievement and opportunity for our most vulnerable children. By and large, the DC parents with whom we speak, and we've actually over the last few weeks been speaking with hundreds of parents, and I know many of them have spoken with you on the phone as well. Parents have made clear that they want a single summative school rating that primarily reflects student academic outcomes. Just as an example, the public charter school sector as a whole has also heard repeatedly from parents about how effective the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 system is for communicating quality to parents. Of course, the accountability framework as a whole can and should also provide families with a more holistic picture of a school's program, whether a school offers art or PE, the minutes of PE, the family engagement opportunities, extracurriculars, while giving educators important data that drives improvement in classroom practice. We believe this will be achieved through the DC state report cards, which are also mandated under ESSA. We've recognized that there are those who fear an accountability system based primarily on PARCC proficiency and growth can lead to an overemphasis on test preparation, but it's important to keep 2 things in mind. First, overemphasis on test preparation is a phenomenon driven by adult responses, which need not occur, to the accountability system, as opposed to an involuntary response somehow required by the system itself. Second, it's actually a self-defeating response at that. The research is clear that the best way to increase student learning is to de-emphasize test preparation, such as item-based sort of drill and kill, and instead embrace a rich curriculum, as you all have talked about, engage students as active learners and critical thinkers, and teach students to master challenging content and skills. The answer to too much test preparation, therefore, is not to reduce the weight of academic outcomes. The answer is to select, support, and retain the best possible talent at the LEA and school level who can teach to mastery and beyond. We think our public schools are up to the challenge. Regardless, diminishing our expectations for academic results or obscuring the picture of school quality we provide to parents is not an acceptable option. To conclude, we at Democrats for Education Reform ask our state board members in DC to work with our state superintendent. And we know there are a lot of really strong recommendations for tweaks and changes to the plan. But ultimately, we ask you to approve the final state plan in March for April submission to the Department of Education. We know our work in DC won't end with the approval of the ESSA plan. Once approved, the hard work begins. There is no perfect policy or even perfect implementation of a policy, but our state plan is very strong and can be improved every year. Let's not kick the can farther down the road. Every year that we delay in giving parents, educators, and policymakers crucial information about school performance is another year that we're putting adult interests ahead of kids.
Sure. Hi, I'm Austin Nichols. I have done a fair amount of work on test scores over the years on measuring teacher performance and school quality. I've written several reports for IES on the topic, but I was asked to come and speak about the properties of tests that are relevant here. So I just want to emphasize that a student's PARCC score or measured achievement on any test are not a measure of growth over time. An average of student scores or proficiency rates are not a measure of school quality. So I think that parents are often led astray by misunderstanding this very simple fact. I think this explains why some parents believe that certain private schools are superior to public schools and unfortunately choose to spend a lot of money or take up a voucher to spend the public money on what in many cases is inferior improvement in test scores over time. On the other hand, growth on tests, assuming that number one, that growth can be well measured, and that number two, tests measure the entire variety of skills that need to be taught by schools, are the only reasonable way to measure school quality. Good tests should therefore be the focus of any accountability regime or measurement of school quality. Good tests give a robust measure of growth or value added by schools. Those tests should also be usable in small parts during the course of the year by teachers to inform instruction. This is called formative assessment. That kind of formative assessment can dramatically improve instruction and thereby school quality. I believe that current tests that are in use not only by DC but other places as well do not particularly support particularly well good measures of growth, do not allow this kind of formative assessment, and do not measure all the relevant skills, including the so-called non-cognitive skills, but they could. And most importantly, even without improving on the tests that were currently used in DC and elsewhere, and without any kind of fancy econometric models, just estimating the mean improvement on test scores measured in scale terms on the theta score is really the best model to identify high-quality schools. Those models that use that simple growth measure are going to identify the high-quality schools with the highest probability. So I just want to mention one important caveat. Test design can really be tweaked in very subtle ways to give any kind of answer that you want. You can find any kind of test score gap that you want with subtle features of test score design. You can also achieve any result on growth with a strategic choice of tests. So you can effectively show essentially any distribution of growth can be achieved by carefully adjusting weights given to questions of different difficulty levels. So the very detailed pieces of test design are important for assessing whether you've got the right measure for measuring school quality as well. Thanks.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here. My name is Scott Abbott. I'm the Director of Social Studies for DC Public Schools. I'm also a Ward 4 resident and a parent of 2 students in Ward 6. I'm speaking tonight in reference to some recommendations that I've submitted online, and so you should be able to have those in front of you, and I'm going to highlight a few points from those tonight. I also want to clarify that these are my own views that have been shared with DCPS leadership, but they do not necessarily reflect the views of DCPS as a whole. There have been some changes to the No Child Left Behind law as a result of the Every Student Succeeds Act to attempt to address some of its shortcomings, in particular the over-reliance on math and reading proficiency as measured by standardized assessments. Since 2001, when No Child Left Behind was approved, schools have increasingly seen a narrowing of curriculum, with subjects like science, social studies, and the arts receiving considerably less time and focus, particularly in elementary grades. Given ESSA's aim to allow states to provide students with a more well-rounded education, the current ESSA plan, particularly the accountability measures, does not take full advantage of new flexibility provided by ESSA. Specifically, a few notes. In the 117-page ESSA plan, social studies is directly referenced only twice. On page 76, the plan says that, quote, DC has rigorous state educational standards in a number of subjects, including social studies, despite the fact that our social studies standards were last updated over 10 years ago in 2006. On page 78, the plan also does list accurately the 5 current social studies courses required for graduation. The word citizen does not appear anywhere in this document, despite the important role that public education is meant to play in the preparation of students to be informed and engaged citizens, as required by our democracy. The accountability measures for pre-K 5, pre-K 8, and 6-8 schools weight English language arts and math assessments as 80% of the overall metrics. Now, others have testified this evening about the importance of academic achievement, and I am certainly in support of that as well. I do think that is a high percentage that actually could be lowered a little bit to make room for some of the other subject areas that make up a well-rounded education. So a couple of specific recommendations. Given ESSA's focus on providing students with a well-rounded education, I would encourage that we add a well-rounded education index to the accountability metrics that are currently proposed for schools K-5, K-8, and 6-8 that would focus on subjects like social studies, science, and the arts in particular. This category could be added by reducing the academic achievement weighting from 40% to 30%, 2.5 from each of the 4 indicators. That would allow schools to report information on some very specific questions. That would still leave 70% for math and English, and so I think that does seem sufficient. Some of the things that we should gather information on, for example, how many minutes of instruction per week per grade are students getting coherent and dedicated instruction that is standards-based in social studies, science, and the arts? How are schools making use of the city as a classroom? So, for example, taking advantage of field experiences, visits to museums, performances. How are we preparing students to be citizens? So are we having students participate in competitions like National History Day, or We the People congressional simulations, or the Mikvah Challenges, Project Soapbox? And then what other special instructional focuses do schools provide for students? For example, dual language, STEM focus, globally themed arts integration. Providing time for social studies and science by measuring in the accountability metrics some of these elements is deeply important, because as we know, what is measured is what actually gets taught and what happens. This is a civil rights issue for our students. Higher income students have significantly more background content knowledge by the time they start school compared to students from low income backgrounds, which is the case for many of our students in DC. This discrepancy creates an inequitable opportunity gap for our students that limits their success in schools, careers, and most importantly, their ability to participate as citizens in our democracy. The proposed revisions would help to close the achievement gap that we see in Washington, DC, which is one of our biggest priorities. Well-rounded education was the intention of ESSA from its inception, and we've heard former Secretary of Education John King speak about this a number of times. At many of the community meetings where I've attended, I've also heard from a lot of parents and social studies, science, and arts educators that there is strong support for including these other subject areas in the recommendations. We also know that content knowledge and skills supports literacy. So even with keeping literacy and math very much as our focus, we know that additional time for students to move, as they move from decoding to reading comprehension, we know the role of background content knowledge plays an increasingly important role in their ability to make sense of complex text. And we need to make sure that they're getting appropriate time for that. I'll mention 2 other things. Historical thinking skills have been increasingly necessary as students are being exposed to more and more, quote, fake news. We know that recent research has shown students are often lacking the skills to source, corroborate, and contextualize the information that they're hearing from the news. And we must equip them with these skills from historical thinking to be able to make sense of the world around them. Finally, the primary mission of public schools in this country in their founding was preparation for citizenship. And we need to make sure that we do not forget that third C. Along with college and careers, we must prepare our students to be citizens. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Jeff Schmidt, a DC resident and author of Disciplined Minds, a book about education. My daughter attended public school here in Washington, D.C. from grades K through 12 and is now a beginning student at the University of Maryland, College Park. I object to your plan to subject the children of Washington, D.C. to academic racial profiling. I've read the 117-page plan that the superintendent wrote with your input. It is astounding that you want D.C. public schools to have lower math and English proficiency goals for Black and Latino children than for white children. For example, the plan requires schools to teach only 1/3 of today's Black 7th graders to read at grade level by the time they are tested in high school in the spring of 2020. But the plan calls for 82% of white high school students to be reading at grade level by then. Nothing in the new federal education law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, requires you to have lower academic expectations for Black and Latino children than for white children, so you don't have to do that. If you want to set different proficiency goals for different students, then you should do so according to each student's proficiency, which you measure every year, not according to your prejudgments based on the student's race. It is arguably reasonable to have a lower end of year proficiency expectation for a student if that student begins the year with extremely low proficiency, but not simply because the student is Black. According to the draft ESSA plan, you plan to prejudge minority children for the next 22 years until 2039. That means you have already decided that tens of thousands of Black and Latino children who haven't even been born yet will be put into low proficiency expectation groups, not because they scored poorly on a test, but because they were born Black or Latino. Everyone knows that expectation affects outcome. Putting a student into a group with low academic goals makes the student wear a badge of inferiority. That undermines the student's morale and has lifelong consequences for the student. Will you please change your plan so that you don't put any student into a low goals group unless you have actually tested that student and sought permission from the student's parents? I testified here on November 16th, 2016, and asked you to make DC's education plan equitable for all races. But you made no effort to do that, even though it would be easy to do. You have shown no will to make DC's education plan equitable. You need to establish a working group open to all stakeholders to recommend a plan that is free of academic racial profiling. That is, a plan with proficiency goals that are based on students' actual measured proficiencies, not on their race. Will you do that?
Thank you for your testimony. Before we get questions from the board, Superintendent Kang, would you like to respond to any of this testimony?
Thank you. I'll keep my comments brief, but I just wanted to address the last testimony in particular because I think it's really important to not leave any misimpressions here. I want to be very clear that we at OSSE, and I believe all members of the State Board of Education, believe deeply that all children have the ability and the potential to succeed at incredibly high levels and to pursue their life opportunities, and that's why I think we all do what we do. I want to be, again, very clear that the goals that we have outlined in the state plan do not in any way determine our individual expectations for any individual child. We believe it's our mission to ensure that we are supporting all children in achieving their goals and their dreams and achieving all life opportunities. I'll be candid that we went through a lot of thought and debate about how we would establish the goal setting mechanism that is required for outlining long-term and annual interim goals in the state plan. I think we debated a lot around the timeline and the aggressiveness with which we could pursue growth. The reality right now is, unfortunately, that our current outcomes for students show deeply troubling gaps that don't in any way match our aspirations and our beliefs in the potential of all students. For example, currently 6% of students in special education are on track for college and career readiness. Between economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged, and we heard tonight about some of the ways in which our economically disadvantaged measure could even be further sharpened, but with our current measure, we see that about 17% of economically disadvantaged students are currently on track for college and career, compared to nearly 60% of non-economically disadvantaged students. That does not reflect the potential of our students, but that is our current reality. And so we need to work actively and aggressively to address those gaps, and we will do so as an education system over time. But in order to set the same goals that were literally the same across all subgroups, it would be ignoring the current reality that exists in our schools and our classrooms. And so we believe and I will again note the point I made earlier, which is that we set out 20-year goals that aim towards all students reaching the same level of proficiency, aiming for 85% of all students at the college and career ready level. And we also talked about a 10-year goal of halving gaps, cutting gaps in half, and working actively towards that point. We had debated whether to set out that 10-year goal as our long-term goal, but we worried that leaving our long-term goal as cutting gaps in half would leave the impression that we didn't believe that all students could ultimately reach the same level, and we thought it was important to make that statement on paper as well as through our intentions. And finally, I'll just note that the way we've set out our goals does require faster progress for the students who are furthest behind, because we are aiming to support those students in making even more growth and improvement, and improving faster than the overall student population in DC. So certainly we welcome all feedback, but I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a misleading impression about how we had set our goals.
Thank you, Superintendent Kane. Any questions, board members? Mr. Whedon?
Thank you all for coming tonight. Catherine, you cited some data that shows that students who do best in college are those who score best on the PARCC score. I'd love to see that research. But the question that I have that I think is most relevant, what about poor students? Is that data consistent for both rich students and poor students or economically disadvantaged students?
I believe so. I'd be happy to send you the study. It was done in 2015 by Mathematica Policy Research. I know a well-regarded think tank here in DC, so I'd be happy to send that to you and put you in touch with the study authors.
Yeah, I'd love to see that, because one of the other themes that's come out today, this leads to my next question, is around that well-rounded curriculum. And with admissions in college and the background experience, background knowledge, my experience has been the students that have that background knowledge tend to do better. So I'm really interested in that point. You also, and Mr. Abbott, you also talked about the focus on test preparation. The current system under No Child Left Behind puts 100% of weight on test scores. And as a result of that, we've developed a system that focuses on testing, test preparation at the expense of other things. We've heard 3 times tonight, though, that if something's not measured, it's not reported. So how do we balance these two things? Does policy lead practice, or how do we encourage practice to change if we're not willing to change our policy?
I have some thoughts, and then Dr. Nichols can share his. So we had an interesting conversation with our policy director about this, and Ruth was there as well. Our policy director, Charlie Barone's view is that if you think something is vitally important, like PE, which we all think is vitally important, or recess, or art, we should just mandate it. And I mean, what I would say is have a real conversation about what is important. In our view, there's a difference between saying that something must happen and actually measuring it as an outcome. I think what I think we would be more interested in is looking at the student outcomes that we care about around well-rounded curriculum. So I know right now we've only done 1 year of a science exam in DC, and I know that in OSSE's state plan, willing to look at, ultimately the incorporation of other subjects. But right now we only have 1 year of data, and I think that that's something certainly worth looking into. But, it would be our view that just like a checkbox, like does a school have art or does it have social studies, or what is the well-roundedness of the curriculum? That's a description, but not an outcome. So in terms of whether policy drives practice, I would say, one thing we've heard from LEA leaders, and I think you all have heard in some of your working groups, we're looking to find the teachers and principals here in DC who can transcend, just practicing the test all day. And I think that that's something we all want. Just having a temperature check and having a thermometer of how kids are doing doesn't mean that in any way, OSSE or the state board is telling teachers, like practice taking tests all day long. I think we can hold these concepts in our mind at the same time, that we can have a school quality rating, but that we can also recruit, retain and support teachers and principals to provide a joyful and engaging environment for our kids.
I'd like to add something here too. So I think your question around do we need the policy or do we need to just sort of support the practice, I think is what I'm hearing here. And I think we need both, frankly. I hear from a lot of elementary teachers that they really want to spend more time doing science, social studies, but that there's a lot of pressure based on the current accountability system to deliver in English and math. And as others have pointed out, of course, providing background content knowledge and providing high quality instruction in those other areas will contribute to better literacy scores. But I think that message gets lost a lot of times when it comes down to it. It's the PARCC score that a lot of folks are looking at. So I think if we actually want to have a system that reflects the values that we have, and if those values include things like preparing students to be citizens, I think the accountability plan has to reflect that as well. And then I think we need to do a lot of work probably to get schools prepared and supported in doing that kind of instruction, which is going to be a shift for some folks. But there's a lot of schools who are already doing great things in terms of setting kids up for success on science fair projects and National History Day and things like this. And I think if we could flip the conversation from us sort of waving our hands and saying, there's great things over here, we'd love for you to do them, to them coming to us and saying, hey, there's actually this requirement, we are now taking this more seriously to provide our kids with a more well-rounded education. I think that would have a tremendous difference for the lives of our students.
I just had a point of clarification about what's required by law. One thing that I'm aware of, and I realize certainly that under a more lax administration, things may change. I hope we would maintain our democratic high standards. Under the ESSA law, it's required that if you use a measure in a state's accountability plan, it must be differentiable by subgroup. I would just point out that whether a school offers a certain subject or minutes of a certain subject, it's actually not differentiable by subgroup. You can measure an outcome, like how students perform on a science exam or how they perform on a social studies exam, but well-roundedness of curriculum, again, we could certainly decide as a community that it should be mandatory. And, if the state board came together, the council, the PCSB came together and said, these things should be mandatory, certainly would entertain that. But it can't be differentiable by student subgroup, and so it's actually prohibited under ESSA.
Right. I think there's some questions about metrics and how we make that measurable. I'm over time, so I'll just end by saying we heard earlier about the mandate for PE hours, and we certainly haven't met that as a city. Yeah, so I do think there has to be this balance here between professional development and curriculum, as well as what's mandated. Mandating it on its own does not seem to be working, at least in that category.
Thank you all for being with us tonight and sharing your thoughts. I had a question for Dr. Nichols. I didn't fully understand how you were defining high quality schools. You referenced in your testimony several times that high quality schools aren't this or that. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you define that?
So this is, obviously it's a term of art. There is no strict definition of a high quality school. My idea of a school is a school that produces some value for the students over time, that improves their performance on some metrics that you can measure, which means you could test for those things, and improves performance is the key thing. It doesn't just select high-performing kids and then keep them there until they're ready to graduate and go to college, which, by the way, 60% of Americans will go to college, and only 40% of them will finish college. So let's not forget that either. It's not everyone who's going to college. But high quality in the way that I was thinking about it is a school that provides additional value added over and above whatever would be business as usual in the absence of a school. We did not always have schools. 150 years ago, we didn't have high schools. So you could just imagine that people get their instruction some other way. What is a high quality school? It's a school that provides value over, versus, someone who's a dropout just studying on their own in a library. Now, high quality versus low quality school is not going to provide any extra value over that. I would hope that a high quality school would provide a lot of extra value over that. So I think that, the reason we focus on math and reading, math and English language arts, is that those are key skills that are needed the first minute you get into college. If you don't have those, you're in remediation, which, many of the education programs that we have focus on the success metric is the percent of kids who go to college and matriculate and do not need remedial classes when they get there. So that's why we focus on those particular tests. But of course, those are only two of the many, many skills that a high quality school should be delivering. And so this, we would like to be able to measure on many, many dimensions, not just two.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt, I really appreciate the spirit of what you're sharing and the call to think about race and equity in ways that are really critical and fundamental to the democracy that we live in. I wondered, what I heard you saying is, could we readjust the way that we think about subgroups so that it's based on previous levels of proficiency rather than race? Is that accurate?
Yes, indeed. The most obvious way to do that would be a decile system, where you just look at your annual test and put the students into 10 proficiency groups and set goals for each proficiency group. The lower proficiency groups you would expect higher growth, of course. ESSA calls for higher growth for the lowest achieving students. And within each proficiency group, all the races would be treated equally. They would all have the same growth expectation.
I wonder what your thoughts are, given that it seems that you've thought about this quite a bit, about the fact that all races aren't treated equally in our country. And so therefore it's incredibly important for us to be recognizing or acknowledging whether our system is actually serving students across multiple races equally well. And how would the decile system you're recommending be able to pull out that kind of information?
Well, you could pull it out you could and should pull it out with a computer program that would show that if the goals of the decile system are met, then African American students would be advancing such and such amount, Latino students, white students. These are all implicit in the plan. We definitely cannot go back to the situation before No Child Left Behind, where the achievement gap was kept secret. These things have to be, the tests have to be given every year, and the results have to be broken down by subgroup, racial subgroup. That has to be made public. But,
okay, that's helpful.
That doesn't mean you have to tell members of racial subgroups that you have lower expectations for them. I talked to a public charter school person recently. He said that their black students are all over the map. Some of them are whizzes at math, and some of them are way behind. It's not fair to the individual black student to put them in a group, to put a label on them that says you're in a group that of which we expect only 1/3 to be able to read by high school. The ESSA law gives states enough flexibility to write a plan that doesn't involve such a fixing of badges of inferiority or academic racial profiling. In fact, ironically, with the rise of the Trump administration, the ESSA flexibility has actually increased. I don't know if you're aware, but about 10 days ago, Lamar Alexander, who heads the Senate committee that deals with education, he told state board leaders, quote, assume that the U.S. Department of Education will say yes, end quote, to their ESSA plans. Quote, you will have a president and an education secretary who do not believe in a national school board, end quote. So it's very unlikely that if you sent a plan to the federal government that did not involve academic racial profiling, it's very unlikely that Betsy DeVos is going to come back and say, no, you have to set lower goals for black students than for white students. Very unlikely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just offer a clarification on one?
Go ahead.
It is the property of tests that the highest average growth will be in the middle of the distribution. That is, the 4th, 5th, and 6th, 7th deciles will have much higher growth than the 1st and 2nd and the 9th and 10th. That is just the property of standardized tests. So just bear that in mind when you consider that kind of approach.
Thank you. Ms. Wattenberg?
Yeah, first, I just want to say, it's this is just a comment with regard to Mr. Schmidt's statement. It's my understanding that the accountability plan does not make use of these long-term ethnic and racially based goals. It's my understanding that these goals are a moral statement and goals against which the agency and others can judge progress. I would like to have confirmation that they are not part of what gets used in the school accountability plan. Is that, that is now confirmed. Okay, I want to make sure of that. So it doesn't affect the scores. Okay, number 2.
Oh, that's not quite true. On page 49 of the plan, it says that schools are rated according to the subgroup, the proficiency.
Right, but that subgroup proficiency is unrelated to the goal. It is related to their score. I just want to clarify that.
It's not clear at all.
I agree with you that it's not clear, but we have now had it clarified, which I am very glad to have done. Thank you very much for clarifying that. So in my judgment, I believe we're set on that. So that's good. So let me move on. I want to go to Mr. Nichols. So you're saying that a high PARCC score, contrary to what we've heard from some witnesses tonight, does not reflect high quality necessarily in a school. So my question is, what does a high PARCC score reflect? If a school has high PARCC scores, what does that reflect?
Well, predominantly selection of students who had higher initial scores. This is quite easy to see looking at the data in DC that the schools that have the highest PARCC scores will tend to have the highest scores of entering students as well. So it's not to say that the growth and proficiency are entirely uncorrelated, but there is a very nice scatter plot that you can do that shows you that, in fact, they're not very highly correlated. Some of the highest quality schools have, in fact, very low proficiency rates, and vice versa, that some of the schools that are adding the least value have very high proficiency rates.
And you have that scatter plot for DC schools?
Well, I have it for past years. It hasn't been done recently, but I mean, so the easiest way to do that is to just look at median growth percentiles, which is not maybe the ideal measure of growth, but at least it is one that's produced for.
One concern I've had throughout, and I raised it earlier in the evening, is that do we end up, the way the current proposal is, do we end up with a system that could conceivably judge low proficiency, high growth schools with a low rating? That is, that the low growth, that the low proficiency would drag down a high.
Did you say low proficiency, low growth?
No, I'm sorry.
Low proficiency, high growth is
correct.
Could get a low rating. Right?
That's right.
That's
and
a
it
real
seems
danger,
to me,
right? Yeah.
What?
That's a real danger. If you downgrade a school that's got low proficiency and high growth, you are effectively penalizing a school that is doing exactly the thing that the public school system, that you really most need from a public school system, that is to even out some of the inequities in access to education by giving the greatest gains to those who start out at the lowest initial test scores. So you definitely do not want to rank those schools lower
That's the greatest concern, is if we looked at that one concern that a number of us have raised a number of times is we don't have the data to be able to understand whether this proposal will have that effect. If we looked at this scatter plot with you, would we be able to understand what the effect would be, if that is something we definitely want to avoid?
Well, I mean, so you need to identify what the growth metric is that enters in the current formula. So there's several I've seen several proposed formulas, but for sure you need. So if it is median growth percentile versus initial proficiency score, or average proficiency score, ideally averaged over a couple of years to reduce the influence of variability in those estimates. And then you apply the current metric to the most recent year and just see where, which schools are ranked at different levels. You can see whether that seems to make sense given, where schools fall on the various parts of that that Cartesian plane, that graph of median growth percentile versus initial proficiency score.
Well, that's the kind of thing, Superintendent, that we've talked about trying to figure out how to do, and I wonder, is that public data that we could work with an independent researcher to look at?
So we can follow up on which specific data is available publicly. I just want to clarify that we have spent considerable time at OSSE generating for the State Board data, which we shared at the last working session, which took into account not just MGP and proficiency, but the multiple factors that are currently built into the accountability system and sharing where different schools fell out. So
we got two examples, and I'm just saying I don't think two. I understand that it takes time. But it's totally critical to the judgment of the plan, in my judgment.
Wait, two examples of schools or two examples of systems?
Two examples of
categories of schools based on how they have different characteristics. I just want to be clear that I think the reason I reference the time is because the information we provide is meant to help the board make an informed decision, and we have limited resources on where we put our time, and so I would hope that information is helpful, but there are limits to what we are able to provide.
That's why I'm asking if the data is public, so that we could look into it ourselves. All right.
So I don't believe the last year of data is public, but previous years are.
But previous would be. Okay.
So you could go back and compare for previous years. But.
Thank you. I want to move to Mr. Abbott, and the light is flashing. I guess you talked about national studies that talked about the decline in social studies, science, arts, and so on, and I wonder if you either have information or anecdotal information. What is your sense of what the effect of this has been at the DC level?
Right. Well, in high school, because we have required graduation credits, we've actually been able to maintain I would say a pretty significant amount of social studies time, which is great. Middle school in DCPS, we recently have had some success, and partially I would attribute that to the fact that we now have a DCPS-wide social studies assessment that is a growth assessment, which we've actually shown has been highly correlated to PARC as well, PARC ELA. In elementary school, it's very much a mixed bag, and I think schools are attempting to do as much as they can to meet the requirements. So some folks will often report that they are trying to integrate social studies or science into their literacy block. And in DCPS, we have unit themes which are chosen based on content topics, which helps to some degree. I would argue that there is a need really for separate social studies time and separate science time as well, because there's a lot of things that you would look at differently based on those particular disciplines. So we might look at a text in an ELA through a literacy lens and look at things about the vocabulary, the text structure, understanding the main ideas of that, but we would stop short sometimes of moving to how historians might look at that same text. So considering things about the historical context in which it was written, considering the source, which becomes increasingly important, considering corroboration, so not just looking at one text to get information about a topic, but looking at multiple texts to think about how we are building an understanding of the past. So I think, given some of the challenges of integrating all of those disciplinary specific skills and a really purposeful move through content that is provided by our state standards, I don't think the current guidelines allow sufficient time for schools to do that. And I also think that because of the focus on math and reading, that is sort of laser-like, which is in many ways good, I think it's hard for us to sort of get a foot in the door with schools in terms of training and getting teachers to pay attention to these other disciplines as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. And Captain, I'm sorry my red light went off, or I was going to have one for you too.
Mr. Batchel.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to, thank you all for staying a little late with us and testifying. I did want to acknowledge the conversation we had. Multiple panelists had pretty extensively about testing and its reliability. And I know there were a few folks, I think at least a couple, who mentioned that oftentimes things like test design and human behavior on the school level can alter outcomes, right? At least on standardized tests, and we know that broadly, sometimes the ends are often altered by the means, right? That's just simple. However, testing is kind of the basic way we judge how well students are prepared for career in college across the board. But like I mentioned earlier, my interest is that we come out of this process with an accountability system that measures both the demonstration of academic achievement through test scores, but also mentions what contributes to academic success, right? So I think, testing is a demonstration, but we also should hold our schools accountable for contributing to academic success, right? Because I think, it was mentioned that, while, some schools may have high test scores, that doesn't mean that they can necessarily work with my student to get to the same level, because they may have a population of students that perpetually score high, right? And so I guess for any of the panelists, I'm asking for advice. How do we get to what metrics could we include that hold schools specifically accountable for not only demonstrating success, but also doing those things that we know contribute to academic success?
So I hear you asking for accountability measures that include inputs as well as outputs, that include the educational inputs and possibly sort of intermediate outcomes. So outcomes, for example, like students actually showing up to school and not exhibiting chronic absenteeism. So I should have started by saying that I'm a graduate of the DC public school system. I graduated in 1989, so I came up through a very different DC public school system. My kids are currently in the DC public school system and are going through a very different public school system than I went through. And I have seen a dramatic change in the inputs, certainly. The kinds of investments that have been made in teaching quality and other attributes of schools is just astonishing to me, having grown up in DC. I don't think, having said that, I don't think a school accountability system should be focused nearly as much on those kinds of inputs or intermediate outcomes as they should be attending to the final outcomes that are of most interest. Now, that said, test scores are not the only outcome of interest. Obviously, matriculation at college, later performance in life. Ultimately, I would like to see labor market outcomes attached to these things as well. So, obviously, these sort of more distal outcomes are harder to measure. The proximal intermediate outcomes, these things that you can observe this week, are much easier to measure. Are kids actually showing up to school? That's an easier thing to measure, and so it's very tempting to put those to give great weight to those things in your accountability metric.
I'd love to weigh in here just to agree with Dr. Nichols, because what you're asking is whether we can hold schools accountable for practice and their inputs. And I guess I would say that, at least in DFER's perspective and the work we've done on ESSA, along with the Civil Rights Coalition, we believe that a state's accountability framework, so when we rate schools' quality and communicate that information to parents and schools, those should focus primarily on outcomes. The one place that I think there's been broad agreement, and it's a big shift from NCLB to ESSA, is growth, a focus on growth, and then also a focus, as Dr. Nichols mentioned, on some of the research-based most significant factors that contribute to student success, so including English language learning growth, attendance, absenteeism, as Dr. Nichols mentioned. Your question of can policymakers hold schools accountable? I think it's actually just using the word accountable in a different way. We absolutely can hold our schools accountable for being great schools. And it's something that parents do every day. Actually, I would say that re-enrollment rate is a really, really strong predictor of parent and student satisfaction with a school. If a school is not engaging students, if they don't love that school, you're going to see really seriously declining enrollment. And so in terms of what to look at that would indicate, some of these other measures that you talk about that make up a great school. There are ways that policymakers can hold schools accountable, but the accountability framework itself, the quality rating system, I think it's agreed largely should focus on outcomes.
I'd weigh in here a little bit as well. I think I'm actually in substantial agreement with what Catherine and Dr. Nichols are saying, and I think very much I believe as well in academic achievement and focusing on what students are able to do. And I think along with that, we need to remember that academic achievement is not limited to reading and math. And so if we feel like the measures that we have are imperfect, maybe that's something that we need to consider for other content areas as well. In addition to our state, I know Louisiana came out with a plan last week in which they proposed an interest and opportunities index, sort of similar to what we're talking about here. So I know other states are interested in this. Currently 25 states test in social studies. I don't know what the number is for science, but there are other measurable ways that we can take these things into account. And we have to remember that academic achievement, while important, is also not the only goal of our schools as well. We want students to be prepared for college, we want them prepared for careers, and we need them to be able to participate as citizens as well.
Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Dr. Nichols, can you repeat what you said about expectations related to testing a couple of board members ago?
I think you're asking about the sort of deciles you might expect to see,
Yes.
the growth you might expect to see at different deciles. So it's a property of tests that they average across effectively a bunch of curvilinear growth curves. And what you see is that the maximum growth on a test will happen at the point where the test has the greatest reliability of measuring. So the expected growth will be highest effectively at the median test score. So the middle of the distribution of test scores should expect to see the highest test score growth over time at any point in time. So if you design a test to measure the median third graders' reading ability, and you measure reading ability across third graders, the test score growth, assuming you've very accurately measured the baseline test score for third graders, the lowest scorers will tend to have lower growth than the median test score, the median students, and the highest students will also have lower growth than the median students. The median students, the kids right in the middle, will have the highest test score growth over time. Now, one factor that interferes with this is we don't accurately measure baseline test scores. There's a lot of measurement error in the baseline test scores, so that adds a layer of complexity here. So in fact, there's a lot of noise in test scores, and so there is this additional factor that that sort of flattens all of that out, essentially, that some of the very low scoring, if you look at the baseline test scores, a lot of the very low scoring students are in fact might be middle of the road achievement levels, but they just got a bad draw on that test, essentially, and so they will have higher than expected growth. And a lot of the highest scoring students are actually middle of the road achievement levels, and they just got a lucky draw on the test effectively, and so they will tend to have even lower growth than you expected, which will tend to sort of add a layer of noise and smooth all those gains out. But on average, you should expect to see, if you graphed growth versus baseline test scores, you should expect to see a kind of upside down U curve of growth with respect to baseline test scores. Sorry, maybe I'm not answering the question you were actually asking.
Oh, you did, but
okay.
I have some questions.
Right.
If you've got that U-line curve, my history is in following markets, so then you're going to see a regression at one point.
Right. So if you estimate, for example, a local linear regression of test score growth on baseline test scores, you will see that upside down, that sort of upside down U, that hump-shaped curve in many state assessments across the country. So for sure, it's available. You can see that in North Carolina's tests. You can see that in Florida's tests.
Okay.
for what it's worth. I mean, it's also just an intrinsic property of tests. The way the psychometrics work, they design the test to really accurately measure at the middle of the distribution, because that's where the bulk of the kids are. And so if you want to maximize your average quality of measurement, you're going to design your test to really accurately measure at that point. And what that means is there are a lot of questions that get right at that level of ability. And if you're making gains on in a whole lot of areas that are all tested, and you're nowhere near that level of ability, you're not going to be making gains on those 60% of questions that are really focused at the middle of the distribution. If you've already passed that level, you're not going to be making gains on those 60 questions because you're already answering them correctly. So that's just a property of tests in general.
Yeah. And you're basically justifying your earlier statement as far as tests.
Right. I mean, so you can design tests to measure any set of abilities very accurately. You could design tests to really accurately measure at the bottom and the top of the distribution instead of right in the middle, which I think is something that we should worry about, because you really don't want floor and ceiling effects of tests. You don't want people who can't make any progress on the test, or we can't measure potential slide on the test when you're focused on accountability based on growth for all students, not just students sort of in the middle of the distribution.
Thank you. I have another question for all of you. I hear everyone speak about re-enrollment as a good indicator, and it may be. I don't have the data to prove that it is or isn't, but the parents that I speak to all across the city, it's probably a better indicator of families with influence, affluence, and knowledge. But then there's a large population of families that just don't know. And those children are re-enrolled in the same bad school year after year. So often, I hear that all the time, but I also hear families that are stuck. So I don't know if it's a good indicator. And is there enough data to truly suggest that it's a good indicator other than being anecdotal? Because that's all I've heard both sides. I don't know, but I want to know if there's any real data that suggests that it's a real indicator. It isn't for me because I haven't seen any data.
It's intuitively very appealing, right? Revealed preference, parents must prefer that school. Yet the data does not support that very well. So, for example, if you look at the study of Chicago Public Schools, where parents and students won a lottery to attend a different school. So this is not a charter school system. This is a lottery system, like school choice was before 1996 in D.C. If you won a lottery to attend a different school, and you see that parents that win the lottery, the kid goes to a different school, on average, that student who goes to a different school is not substantially better off on academic metrics, although the students and parents seem to prefer that school. So parents and students are not choosing that school based on the academic quality or the improvement in academic performance that school would achieve, that school would produce for that student. There are some other features of the social environment, the sports, music, what have you environment that maybe are more appealing. You also see this for childcare, where parents sort of uniformly report that they're choosing first on the quality of the childcare, and then maybe second they'll mention the cost of the childcare, and then far down at the bottom is the convenience of the childcare. When you observe the actual pattern behavior, by far the most important thing is the convenience of the childcare. So there's a little bit of motivated reasoning that happens here, that parents convince themselves that they're making the choice that is in their child's best interest, that they are in fact choosing the highest quality school, the highest quality center-based care that's achievable, when in fact a big part of that is simply the convenience. And we shouldn't discount that convenience matters, right? If you're going to your neighborhood school and it's just down the block, that's a pretty appealing option, and it may be difficult for all kinds of reasons, not just because of the commuting costs and the cost of time of getting to a different school. There's a psychic cost in going further away. So we shouldn't completely discount this. On the other hand, people are making those choices based on things that are not directly related to academic achievement.
That's a Chicago study. I just wanted to bring up the 2016 Mathematica study by Steve Glazerman, who couldn't attend tonight. I would never want to contradict Dr. Nichols because I'm not a researcher, but I would say that Steve Glazerman's study of parents' revealed preferences in Washington, D.C., where we do have a strong choice system, a strong charter authorizer, and we are trying to communicate more to parents about quality, particularly through the charter's tier system. There is a correlation to location. However, also strongly correlated with parent preferences are school index scores, which is the old OSSE system. And one thing that the charter sector has also observed is more and more parents enrolling their children in Tier 1 schools. Every year that we've used the tier system, we've had much higher enrollment in Tier 1 schools. Partially it's because we've been closing Tier 3 schools, but it's also partially because we've been aggressive about communicating with parents whether schools are Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So while I think the Chicago choice landscape is interesting, I wish Steve Glazerman were here to talk about the DC landscape just because I think it's unique. All of that is to say I'm sure there's a lot of differing opinions on re-enrollment, and I'm sure OSSE's been thinking it through.
We have another question, and we have a Cosme Hunt who has not had the opportunity to testify. So if we can keep our answers a little shorter in this next round. Mr. Jacobson, thank you.
I want to thank you all for being here and for bringing your perspectives and your backgrounds and experience to us. It's very helpful. Mr. Abbott, this is one of the issues that came up in the meeting of the ESSA committee was this idea at our meeting on Monday, was this idea of having a suite of academic experiences at a school that would showcase that the school has a well-rounded curriculum and well-rounded offerings. I appreciated you, Ms. Bellinger, sort of clarifying the constraints that we're under ESSA in terms of measurability and differentiability by subgroup. Mr. Abbott, do you think there is any way to take those two differing viewpoints and marry them in an effective way?
Right. I think this is the question a lot of folks are asking across the country right now. So I think we would have to, I think for things like seat time, that's something that you could get down to the individual student level if you're looking at by grade. So I think you could break that information down according to the standards that ESSA requires, my understanding. I think if you're looking at other indicators, I think it becomes a little bit more challenging. So I think you'd have to do things like track which students are participating in which of these kinds of events. So like if we had a science fair, for example, you'd have to know, which students are eligible to participate in that science fair at that particular school and which students actually did. But it depends on how we want to set up, say, a rubric to evaluate that. I know looking at some of the other states, they're looking at, say, a percentage of students in different subgroups who would be hitting each of these benchmarks. I think if we were going to move forward on an index like that, we would have to come up with a rubric that would account for different levels of performance so that it would be quantitative and meet the requirements of ESSA. But I think it's possible.
Ms. Bellinger or Dr. Nichols, do you see any similarities? I don't know if you caught the question, but the tension between having a broad suite of educational experiences available at a school versus what Ms. Bellinger pointed out, the need to have measurable and differentiable by subgroup metrics. Is there a way to resolve those two pieces that seem to be in tension?
I do believe that every school should offer all of those things. The problem, of course, is that the provision of those sort of extraneous to measured outcomes or possibly extraneous to measured outcomes provisions are concentrated in the areas where you don't need to spend as much time on improving the measured outcomes. It's an unfair system essentially. But beyond that, I don't know what to say. It's you should be measuring the outcomes that you care about. One of those things is sort of civic engagement. Another of those things is a variety of non-cognitive skills that are much more important to predicting labor market outcomes and success in college, for that matter, than your math score, even though math score is crucial to your earnings in later life, for sure. So, I mean, to the extent that you can measure a broader set of things and not measure, sort of each specific type of extracurricular, it shouldn't be extracurricular, but any specific type of service, and just measure this set of skills and say different schools can make different choices about, whether a music program is more appropriate to achieve that set of, non-cognitive outcomes that you're looking to achieve, or something else is.
Right. Thank you. And Ms. Bellinger, I'm going to apologize where I'm past time, and I just
going to say that I agree.
Okay.
Dr. Nichols and I may disagree on some things, but I think that was eloquent.
Thank you for interjecting that. And just lastly, to the point of measuring additional subjects, I think what we've heard frequently is having less focus on assessments, and I think testing additional subjects would just be counterintuitive, and would seem to put even more emphasis on testing. So we're working on this. We're working with our partners at OSSI, and we appreciate you sharing your viewpoints and your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate your help. Thank you. Mr. Hunt? Is Dan Gordon here? Frank Serkovich? Stephen Glazerman? Mr. Cosby, Mr. Hunt, just pull the microphone over. You have 5 minutes. Thank you for coming tonight.
Well, that's a lot of pressure, a one-person panel. Dear members of the State Board of Education, thank you for this opportunity to speak in favor of including a measurement for well-rounded education in our city's Every Student Succeeds Act accountability plan. Just this week, my 4th grade son proudly informed me that his class's unit on the Revolutionary War would include reading, writing, and social studies. This warmed my heart and at the same time picked at an old wound. Why is it that reading and writing are so often seen as things separate from social studies? When I write to other people's senators about our current Secretary of Education, I'm not just doing an English assignment. One might say that I'm being a citizen, a word not found in the current accountability plan. As I looked at the marvelous signs my fellow citizens created for the recent Women's March, I was reminded that citizenship includes not only reading about the things we care about, but sometimes writing about and creating visual representations to protect them. As one sign put it, science, it's a thing. In an era of fake news, we need students who don't just trust what they read, but can test their own hypotheses. My son's teachers have taken it upon themselves to teach art, social studies, and science, but right now there is no mandate that they do so. Without some kind of accountability measure for their K-8 schools, our young people are at a severe disadvantage when they arrive in high schools that require multiple credits in those disciplines. Having taught high school in DC public schools for 16 years now, I can assure you that students who are just for the first time learning the difference between a primary and secondary source in 9th grade or later are at a severe disadvantage. I can assure you that middle schoolers who have written a process paper and prepared an annotated bibliography through the National History Day program, for example, are considerably more prepared for success in high school and in life than their classmates who have not. I can also assure you that DCPS's wonderful study abroad initiative will have an even greater impact if students have tried their hand at making a mural, for instance, before they stand before the impressive work of Diego Rivera in Mexico City. I can assure you that students who have an understanding of the chemistry behind eat your vegetables and fruits will help you keep our country's health care costs down. And I can assure you that it is the students who come to understand why our DC license plates say taxation without representation early in the game who are in the best position to change that game as adults. The PARCC test will not matter to our young people after 10th grade. The need to read, write, do arithmetic, follow the scientific method, express themselves creatively, and be citizens will matter to them always. Let's make room for all those disciplines in what we expect of our schools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Board members, do we have any questions for Mr. Osby? Ms. Weinberg?
I'm just going to say, hear, hear. Thank you so much for coming and speaking for myself and perhaps everybody. We're so exhausted that I have no question for you, but I'm so delighted that you came out and to hear your testimony, and I really do hope that we're going to be able to figure out a way to include that for all the reasons that you say. And I will also just say at our ward meeting held last week, I think it was the issue that came up the most, was this issue of well-roundedness and the concern about it.
And I'll say that I'm also wary of over-testing. So I'm not necessarily sitting here saying we have to test social studies. I do think that events like National History Day, like Project Soapbox, are things that can move students along. Those things can be very hard to measure. But we have to make sure that there's got to be some way that kids are doing science, social studies, and the arts in elementary school. If I'm not mistaken, the second most failed course in DCPS is World History 1. And that doesn't surprise me, because if they haven't gotten any social studies until 9th grade, they're not going to do well when you start talking about ancient civilization.
So just a quick question. Thank you for coming. As far as I understand it right now, I know that charters establish their own systems for evaluating teachers, but DCPS has a very high percentage that's assigned for teacher performance related to test scores, at least for grades 3 and up. And I think for the lower grades, it's not the state test, but it's another version of academics. So if things were shifted in the state plan related to the way that test scores count in terms of accountability for a school, from your perspective as a teacher, would anything really change in the classroom so long as teacher accountability and principal accountability is so tied to our state standardized tests?
I would like to think that something would change. I'm not sure. I'm sure that Mr. Abbott spoke earlier about a way to shift the accountability plan to make room for the well-rounded education. But the answer to your question is I'm not sure. I'd like to think yes.
Thank you.
I don't have a question so much as a comment. I want to say thank you very much for your testimony. It's eloquently written, and it will be taken into account, not only looking forward to ESSA and a well-rounded education, but also as we move into later this year, our graduation requirements and our new curriculum requirements.
I'd like to say thank you as well for this very well-worded speech. Inspired Teaching is a school that was my son's first experience in school, and studying there was an experience that changed his projection in life at an early age, and it basically was because of the expeditionary learning that goes on there, that goes beyond that of just reading and writing and doing math, is that social studies is ingrained in that particular school, and that we need to identify schools that are doing that at an early age and have them come and speak to us of how they've been able to utilize their time wisely, so that social studies is a major component of it. at an early age, because my son at 3 was quoting Shakespeare because they were at the Shakespeare Theater by the time they were 6. So it can be done. It's just that I think part of it is getting our schools, our communities to talk to each other so that social studies can be seen as a very important part in early age, in early grades as well. So I'd like to thank you for your paper and your comments, because it truly speaks to what we need to be doing more of in the District of Columbia besides just reading and math. Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam President. Cosby, I didn't want to ask you a question because it's so late, but I must because you.
Well, I showed up late so you can, everybody else can go home and we can just hang out. That's fine.
That's cool too. But when you said you're wary of over-testing, help me out here. What's considered over-testing? And
well, let me say, going back to thank you for the comment about the Inspired Teaching School where my 2 sons go. I think one of the reasons why that school appeals to a lot of people is that we take the tests when we have to take them, but the teachers, the adults, and by effect, the students don't spend much time talking about them. There are some schools where, the field trips get shut down around February, and everybody goes into testing mode up until April. And it's just kind of a nightmare. And there are other schools where they just take the tests and they just get on with it. And that's a lot healthier, in my opinion. And so I am wary that if we get into a science, an arts, and a social studies test on top of math and reading, everybody's going to be stressed out, and there's going to be more of the shutting down the field trips to get ready for the tests kind of phenomenon. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for coming to testify. This is the model that I think the Common Core wanted, that even though the emphasis is on language arts and math, that language arts includes social studies and other forms of science and the arts. So I'm inspired by your school having mastered this ability to take other subjects and put it into the curriculum and make it part of the program to give our children the rich education and experience that they need. And thank you for this model.
Madam President.
Yes, Mr. Batchelor.
I'll be brief, but I do want to thank you for your testimony. And, I think we spent a great deal of time understandably talking about outcomes and outputs, but I do think it's nice when we get to talk a little bit about what goes into making great outcomes. And I think what you mentioned is absolutely right. I think parents choose schools based on achievement and academic performance, but also based on the experience that their student will get. I think, the thing that made my experience, for instance, at Martin Luther King Elementary School great was, not just those standard things, but getting to not only learn Dr. King's words, but understand them, right? I think what made my experience at Hardy Middle School great was being able to learn how to play an instrument and be in the theater, which enhanced my critical thinking skills. I did National History Day, as a middle schooler, going to Thurgood Marshall Academy and really having all of our academics focused on a social justice bend made me a good citizen, right? And so we should definitely encourage all of our schools to insert those things, right, and focus on those things, because you're right, they're not only important for great outcomes, but also for making our students great citizens. And so I really appreciate that, and thank you very much.
Karen, can I use my remaining time to make one comment?
Do you have any remaining
I
time?
did. I was so quick. All I said was thank you for being here. I just wanted to pick up on this point about the over-testing and your point that at a school, it is possible, and Catherine Bellinger mentioned this as well, it is possible to just take an end-of-the-year test and not freak out over it all year long. And I think we do a great disservice to our kids in this city by allowing and even having some of the LEAs encourage the freaking out over the testing. And I would like to suggest that as we move forward, and we may want to include other tests, but I'll tell you, we only want to include them, and politically we only could include them if we could get rid of all of the excessive test prep and pre-tests and this test and that test that goes on now. So I want to just raise the possibility, and we talked about this a while ago, that there is federal money, I think still available, Superintendent, to do a kind of testing that would bring stakeholders together, to, or really the LEAs, to talk about how to reduce the testing so that they're taking the end of the year test, but not inundating the kids in the school year with testing. And I wonder if that's something we could think about.
I'm aware of the requirement you're speaking of. It's not new federal dollars. It's allowable use for existing.
Allowable use.
The last thing I'll say is Dr. Nichols mentioned something about a labor market study. I sure would love to see us as a city put in some money toward a longitudinal study, take, I don't know, 400 kids and try to track them over 8 years and interview them and try to find out what were the things for you that worked in your schooling experience and what were the things that were worthless. And I think we might get some very valuable information just by following a small group or a larger group of young people as they move out of our schools. That's obviously, you know, we're not going to get that information for a decade, but it could be very valuable.
Seeing no further questions, I would like to thank all of our witnesses for their input and for their patience during this lengthy hearing. With no further witnesses, no further business before the board, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Unanimous consent.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those, anybody opposed? Okay, so the board, this meeting of the District of Columbia State Board of Education is adjourned at 9:08 p.m. Thank you. Oh, man.